Chapter 7. Let There Be Light. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Thursday, 3 November 1994. Great Hall, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry stepped into the Great Hall of Hogwarts, looking around with interest. His first thought was that it was positively huge, easily 3 or 4 times the size of Stonewall High's exercise gym. 4 long tables ran the length of the hall, bench seating on either side, obviously for the 4 houses to eat at. A 5th table, this one much smaller, ran perpendicular to the others, sitting up on the raised platform. For the teachers, he figured. One side of the hall was bedecked in great stained glass windows, letting in sheets of light, while above him the ceiling mimicked the sky outside, complete with clouds gliding across it. Magic, he had to remind himself. Dozens of wall scones dotted the walls, waiting to light the room at night. Not that Harry could tell how just wall sconces would be enough to light up a room the size. His inspection was interrupted by a trio of boys materializing in front of he and his 4 new friends. Harry's eyebrows rose even as he internally berated himself. 2 of these boys were built along the same lines as Dudley and were obviously not people that one should normally be able to overlook. The expression on their faces made him believe that they were probably just as smart as Dudley was as well. The 3rd boy was different. His platinum blonde hair was immaculately slicked back with nary a hair out of place. His green-trimmed black robes appeared to be of the highest quality, and his facial expression telegraphed his high opinion of himself for the world to see. Harry was content to reserve judgment before deciding if the boy's opinion of himself was justified. Finally decided to come to Hogwarts, did you, Potter? The blonde-haired leader of the 3 drawled. Hi, you obviously already know that I'm Harry Potter. Nice to meet you, Harry said with a false cheeriness. Oh, this is Crabbe and that's Goyle, he said, indicating the 2 hulking brutes behind his shoulders. And I'm Malfoy, Draco Malfoy. Are you really? Harry replied, thrusting his hand out to be shaken. I've never met anyone named Draco before. That's kind of a cool name. Draco Malfoy seemed slightly taken aback by that, and it took him a couple of seconds to return to what was obviously a pre-prepared speech. Now that you're here, you'll soon find out that some wizarding families are much better than others, Potter. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort. I can help you there. Harry had noted the way Malfoy's eyes darted to both Neville and Hermione as he stated the wrong sort. And in that, Harry had the boy's measure. Can you really? He asked eagerly. At Malfoy's conceited nod, Harry continued. In that case, I'd better know before I go wrong what makes a family the right or the wrong sort. Malfoy stared at him before his face morphed into what was seeming to be its customary expression, a haughty sneer. Well, you see, Potter, most of it comes down to breeding, Malfoy explained. Breeding, you say? Harry echoed thoughtfully, momentarily ignoring the horrified expressions that Hermione, Neville, and Susan were now throwing him. Yes, exactly, Malfoy nodded. Those magical families that can trace their families back at least 15 generations are the ones that have the most magical power. So families with a magical strength derived from a long magical history are the ones that I'm looking for, Harry confirmed. To begin with, Malfoy cautioned. Of course, that is only the start. You will find that those families inevitably also come with the most money and influence within society and on the political scene. Harry nodded in understanding before turning to Neville. So, Nev, I've got to ask, how far back can you trace your magical heritage? 23 generations, Harry, Neville replied. Good, Susan, same question. 27 generations, she replied. Daphne's eyes narrowed when he turned to face her. Harry knew that she'd picked up that something was going on here, but he was certain that she had no idea what it was. Before you ask, The Greengrass family can trace its magical heritage back 19 generations. Hermione's head had dropped before he even turned to ask her. I'm a first-generation witch, Harry, she told him dully. Both my parents are muggles. She turned to go, but Harry quickly reached out and caught her arm, holding her in place. Once he was certain that Hermione was going to stay, he turned back to Malfoy. So I should be friends with Neville, Susan, and Daphne. Oh, and you too, I presume, he summed up. Well, Malfoy drawled. Myself and Daphne, definitely. The other two, probably not. Why? Harry asked incredulously. Both Susan and Neville have longer family histories than Daphne does. True, but their families have sullied themselves by getting mixed up with muggles, Malfoy confided, leaning closer. Interesting, Harry replied. What about me? Where do I fit into this? I'm descended from two ancient families, the Potters and the Peverells. Am I considered as being from the right sort of families? Ordinarily, you would be, Malfoy replied reluctantly, but your father sullied both of those families by marrying a mudblood. Harry frowned in confusion. Here was a term that he didn't recognize. He turned to Neville with a raised eyebrow, but it was Susan who answered. Mudblood is a derogatory word for a first-generation witch or wizard, also known as a muggle-born. She then went further to help him understand. Malfoy and Daphne are what are called pureblood. Neville and I are classified as blood traitors. That basically means that we've sullied ourselves by associating with muggles or muggle-borns. You, on the other hand, having one magical and one muggle-born parent, are known as a half-blood. Ah, thank you for that, Susan. Harry smiled before turning back to Malfoy. So, who I should befriend comes down to what their family status is. And their family status will also tell me how much magical power, money, and influence they have. Is that about right? Malfoy gave a shaky nod at the distinct summation. If all that is the case, I've got to wonder why in the world you're talking to me, a half-blood in the first place, Harry mused before waving that question aside. But that's for another time. I want to see more of this family blood standing and how it works. Looking over Malfoy's shoulder, he pinned Crabbe and Goyle with his gaze. I take it by the fact that you're with Draco here that you're both purebloods. When he got confirming nods, Harry began to boldly grab each of the 6 around him and rearrange them. Crabbe and Goyle he stood beside Malfoy, with Daphne beside him. Next came Neville and Susan, and then a gap for himself, with Hermione on the end. So this is how the standings work, he asked, before pointing to each grouping. Purebloods, blood traitors, half-bloods, and first-generation magicals. Right, right. Now I want to see this in action. I can't do much magic yet, but I can produce a light. I'm guessing that that's all beyond simple for the rest of you. Now, if you all make a light, am I right that the lights at this end, here he pointed at the pureblood end, before switching to point towards Hermione, will be brighter than that end? That's right, Malfoy said firmly, but Harry caught the trace of uncertainty in his voice. It'd help if we all really push our magic into the spell, Harry, Susan suggested. Push the magic into the spell, Harry mused, running one hand through his hair. Okay, I think that I can do that. Now we're going to need a judge, someone impartial. Looking around, Harry now realized that they'd gathered a crowd. Dozens of black-robed Hogwarts students surrounded the lineup that Harry had made. He considered asking one of them before he found the perfect solution. Rushing out through the crowd, Harry skidded to a stop in front of the closest teacher. This man was tall with straight, greasy black hair that was parted in such a way as to form curtains to either side of his face. He also had the largest beak for a nose that Harry'd ever seen. Potter, what are you doing out of uniform? The man drawled. Taken momentarily aback, Harry glanced down at himself before waving the question away. If you mean the robe, sir, I know that it's not a part of Stonewall's uniform, but I wanted something that make me blend in more with the wizarding world. But who's going to tell them, hey? Now, I was wondering if you could help us, sir. Help you, Potter. the man asked in wonder, as though he'd never been asked such an outlandish question before in his life. Yes, sir, Harry nodded. You see, we're having a debate over there about blood status and how that equates to magical power. We're all going to produce a light, and we need someone to tell us if the brightness equates to the appropriate blood status. While he was talking, he'd managed to lead the teacher back with him. As soon as he was there, he slipped into place between Hermione and Susan. Well, get on with it then, the teacher drawled. Harry paused, watching as the others pulled their wands and muttered or said, "Lumos." Seeing the end of their wands light up with a white light, Harry nodded, lifted his hand, opened his palm and willed there to be light. Instantly, a ball of white light the size of a tennis ball hovered above his palm. He smiled at it and cocked his head, examining it for flaws. Then, remembering what Susan had said about pushing his magic into the spell, he willed the ball to be brighter. His eyes squinted as the ball grew half again, as big while increasing in brightness, nearly tenfold. Harry could feel sweat forming on his brow the longer that he pushed his magic into this bright, incandescent ball on the palm of his hand. Finally, he could hold it now more and willed it to extinguish. Breathing hard, Harry bent over, resting his hands on his knees. Finally, he lifted his head to look at the teacher. So, did it work how it was supposed to? Who was the brightest? I believe it's safe to say that you produced the brightest light, Potter, the hook-nosed teacher replied, with some weird look on his face that Harry couldn't identify. Oh, well, then what about everyone else? What was the order of brightness? Harry asked, straightening as he felt his strength begin to return. The teacher's lips pursed, and Harry wondered if he was going to answer. Then, after taking a glance at the gathered crowd, he gave the results of their experiment. Miss Greengrass and Miss Granger produced an equally bright lumos. Mr. Malfoy and Miss Bones' lights were only slightly less bright. Next was Mr. Longbottom, with Messrs. Crabbe and Goyle producing the dimmest lumos. Thank you, sir, Harry replied with a nod before turning to Malfoy. Well, it seems that your theory of blood status equaling magical power is in error, Draco. Malfoy looked about to protest in some way, shape or form, a protest that Harry was loath to allow. The results were clear and judged fairly and impartially by Professor. Harry looked quizzically at the teacher, realizing that he'd forgotten to ask his name. Thankfully, the man came to the rescue. Snape. Professor Snape, and it is very clear exactly what that experiment demonstrated. You, Draco Malfoy, are a bigot. I suggest that you have a good, long, hard think about what happened here today and how that measures up to your blood status view of the world. Shifting his eyes to the other two large boys, Harry nodded to them. Thanks for helping out. Their confusion over how to respond only caused Harry to shake his head before he turned to smile at his friends. Shall we go have lunch? He asked. The other four formed up around him as they moved away from the crowd. Once more focusing on the now crowded tables, Harry spotted a potential problem. Where should we sit? He asked, waving his hand ahead of them. It is customary to sit with one's housemates, Daphne told him. And indeed, apart from two groups of students in different colored robes, one group in sky blue and the other in blood red, each table was dominated by Hogwarts students wearing only one trim color. Well, that could be a problem, he mused. I guess that, if you guys are willing to have me, I'll just have to rotate amongst you every meal. You could sit with me at the Gryffindor table today, if you want, Neville asked hesitantly. Sounds great, Neville, thanks. We'll catch up with you girls later, Harry smiled before allowing Neville to lead him to one side of the hall. Space was made for the two of them amongst others, who Harry thought looked to be the same age as them. Hi, I'm Harry, he said, looking around at everyone. Harry, these are the Gryffindor fourth years, Neville introduced, indicating each one. That's Dean and Seamus beside you, this is Ron next to me, and across from us are Lavender, Parvati, Faye, and Alice. A chorus of hellos, were given as well as handshakes all around. "That was some show you put on over there," Seamus stated in an Irish accent as he spooned potatoes onto his plate. "Yeah, I guess it was," Harry shrugged. "Couldn't be helped, though." "What do you mean?" Fay asked. "Did Malfoy say something?" "In a way," Harry replied. "He offered to introduce me to the right sort of families. And then he had the audacity to explain about blood status, insulting most of my new friends, and me as well, come to think about it." "How'd you know that that light competition would give results like that?" Neville asked. Harry shrugged. "To be honest, I didn't. All that I could go on was two facts. One, I've been given 4 tutors who are top of their classes here and coincidentally representing every type of blood status that Malfoy was going on about. And two, I knew his type." "You picked up that he's a bullying git from that one small conversation?" Ron asked. "Yeah, you see, I know bullies. I should after having to suffer them all my life, at home, in primary school, and the first couple of years at Stonewall. And there was no way that I was going to let him get a toehold into the idea that he could bully me here," Harry explained, before turning to Neville. "Sorry to put you and the others on the spot like that. I know what it's like to have unwanted attention. I've been getting it every time I'm in the wizarding world with that boy who lived crap." "Crap," Ron spluttered, "but you're ruddy famous." Harry stared at him, as though he'd just grown 2 heads. "Why in the world would I want to be famous for not dying when my parents did?" he asked. "I'd much rather have them still around than all that stupid fame." "But isn't that what got you into the TriWiz?" Dean asked. Harry shrugged. "Probably. At least, that's my guess. Someone sticking my name into that bloody cup and hoping that it'd come out. I'm assuming that the press has been going wild with there being 4 champions and the boy who lived being one of them." "They have," Lavendar nodded. "There's been something about you and it on the front page every day since." "So you don't know how your name got into the goblet?" Parvati asked. "Nah, how could I? I was tucked away down in Surrey. Didn't even know this tournament existed until 2 wizards knocked on our door that night." Harry shook his head. "The question of how my name got into, and then came out of, that cup is one for the magical police." "Auras," Neville supplied helpfully. "Auras, right, I'll try to remember that. Anyway, if I couldn't have entered, then I can't see how I can be made to compete," Harry stated. "Then why are you here if you're not going to compete?" Fay finally asked, into the silence that Harry's statement had created. "Oh no, don't get me wrong. I'll compete. At least enough not to lose my magic," Harry confirmed. "And as to why I'm here, let's just say that competing in a competition that I have no hope of winning is a better alternative than what I already had." "How can you say that you have no hope of winning?" Ron asked incredulously. "After seeing what you can already do with your magic, there's no way that you won't win." "You mean the light thing?" Harry asked, only to receive a vigorous nod. "I only taught myself that so that I could get my homework done. By the time that I'd finished work and done my chores, I'd run out of my electricity allotment for the day, and I needed light to see what I was doing. So I taught myself this." Harry lifted his hand and produced his light ball. Around him, there were oohs and ahs galore. "Took me months to work out how to do, and then even longer to make it stay lit when I wasn't focused on it." "What else can you do without a wand?" Seamus asked eagerly. After vanishing the light, Harry turned his palm and willed the salt shaker in front of Dean to come to him. "And that concludes the extent of my magical powers," Harry told them. "Not likely, Harry," Neville shook his head. "If you can already do that, I don't think that it's going to take you long to learn to do the same things that we can." Harry shrugged noncommittally. The talk then evolved into the others telling Harry all about the magic that they'd learnt and what Hogwarts was like, and the classes, as well as the teachers, all interspersed with a little about each of themselves as well. /0v0 / Thursday, 3 November 1994. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. You are certain that those are the subjects that you wish to pursue? Professor McGonagall asked Harry as they walked the corridors of Hogwarts. Yes, ma'am, Harry replied. Care of magical creatures and ancient runes both sound fascinating, and both Daphne and Hermione assure me that arithmancy will be incredibly useful. As long as you aren't feeling pressured into something that you don't want to do, Professor McGonagall persisted. Not at all, Harry assured her. The only other option was Muggle studies, and Hermione said I'd do much better at Thatnet studying it than attending the classes. Yes, I am quite aware of Miss Granger's feelings towards that particular subject, Professor McGonagall stated, her lips thinning considerably. As they walked, Professor McGonagall produced a piece of parchment from her pocket and tapped it with her wand. She then presented it to him. Your schedule. As you can see, the vast majority of your classes are in the evenings. That was the only way that we could work the individual instruction time between you and the professors into your schedule. Those classes will begin on Monday. That will give you tomorrow and the weekend to begin reading up on each subject. You will also need to discuss appropriate times to spend with Mrs. Granger, Bones, and Greengrass, as well as with Mr. Longbottom. Do remember that they are giving up their own personal time in order to offer you tuition. Do not abuse it. Of course not, ma'am, Harry quickly assured her. The rest of your time you will be expected to self-study, Professor McGonagall continued. For safety's sake, I would suggest that you begin primarily with the non-wand-based subjects until you have had some instruction in the wanded subject areas. Yes, ma'am, Harry agreed. For some minutes after that, the two walked in silence. Harry was fairly certain that they were on the third floor, somewhere in the northeast part of the castle. Quite unexpectedly, Professor McGonagall stopped beside a sculpture of a magical knight of some kind. At least, that's what Harry thought that he was supposed to be. He was wearing medieval armor, with a sheathed sword on his right hip and a shield mounted on his left arm. The primary way that he differed from a regular knight, though, was the existence of a wand clutched firmly in the knight's right fist. Sir Roderick, this is Mr. Potter, Professor McGonagall said to the sculpture. He will be residing within the quarters that you guard for the foreseeable future. Hello, Harry said, feeling incredibly foolish for talking to a carved piece of stone. The knight's helmet shifted to face Harry before he bowed slightly in greeting. You'll need to set Sir Roderick a password so that he knows who to let into your rooms, Professor McGonagall told him. Okay, Harry said, thinking furiously of a suitable and easily remembered word. One word immediately stood out in his mind. In fact, it was the word that had been fairly common in his life quite recently. Stepping closer to the knight, Harry whispered his choice, Rowan. With a nod of understanding, Sir Roderick stepped to the side, revealing a plain wooden door. At Professor McGonagall's gesture, Harry stepped forward, opened the door and entered. Inside, he found a quaint little sitting room made up of two recliners and a two-seater lounge in deep blue fabric, grouped around the small coffee table that sat before a small fireplace. At the back of the room, directly in front of a large window, was a table, one hard-backed wooden chair at each of its ends. Two doors were set on the wall to his right, a tall, empty bookcase set in between them. You will find a private bathroom through one of those doors, and your bedroom through the other, Professor McGonagall told him from the doorway. If you need anything, come find one of the staff, and we'll be more than willing to help you. Thank you, Professor, Harry smiled. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a third-year class of Hufflepuffs and Slytherins to teach shortly, she said, before nodding to him and closing the door behind her. Leaving the two doors for now, Harry crossed the room and circled the table. He threw open the window and grinned to find a view partly filled with the Black Lake, the rest taken up with a long expanse of grass before it disappeared into a dense forest. A flash of white caused him to step back in time for his snowy owl to glide through the window, before perching on the back of one of the chairs. Hey, Hedwig, he said, reaching out and stroking her breast feathers. Told you the first thing that I'd do would be to open the window when I was given my room. Hedwig blinked slowly at him in what Harry took as a grin. I'll make you a proper perch as soon as I can, Harry promised. For now, though, I hope you don't mind if I check out the rest of this place. The first door that Harry opened was his new bedroom. The first item that he noticed was the chest of drawers beside him, but that was only out of the corner of his eye. What really captured his attention was the enormous four-poster bed. Grinning maniacally, Harry raced forward, intent on throwing himself on what looked to be luxurious softness. Just before he leapt, though, he came to a screeching halt. A package had been placed in the very center of his bed. Curiously, Harry picked up the brown papered object. His head cocked as he pulled the slip of parchment loose from where it had been wedged under the string ties. Then, unfolding it, he read the message. Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time it was returned to you. Use it well. Chapter 8. Crowds and First Classes. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Saturday, 5 November 1994. Harry's quarters, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry knew that he was hiding. That didn't mean that he had to admit it, except perhaps to himself in the deepest, darkest part of his consciousness. It was easy to fool himself that he was doing necessary work. After all, it simply wouldn't do to leave the massive pile of lumber lying in the middle of his workroom. And then there were the buckets and the wheelbarrow of wood offcuts that needed to be stored, tools to be hung in place ready for use, tins of lacquer and boxes of nails and screws to put away, and a special place to find for his whittling materials. And once all of that had been sorted, Harry could then move on to provisioning his Rowanwood desk ready for study, and after that could work on setting up an art station. So it was quite easy to fool himself into believing that what he was doing was vitally important before he became swamped with learning all of these strange new subjects. Not that he believed it, of course. How could he not? Especially after the way that he'd raced into his quarters, his heart pounding, his breathing ragged the way that it was. He'd now been in the castle at Hogwarts for 2 days, and in that time he'd been swarmed by nearly everyone. Everyone, from the students to the teachers to the ghosts of all things, had wanted to meet him and talk his ear off. And if there was one thing that Harry truly hated, it was attention. Attention meant that eyes were focused on him, and if eyes were focused on him, inevitably bad things would happen. Of course, it all traced back to the Dursleys. Whenever his aunt or uncle's eyes were on him, it meant extra chores or failing that, beatings or other punishments for failing to complete said punishments in a timely or correct enough fashion, or else for doing something freakish. Dudley, too, was someone who Harry had never wanted attention from. Dudley's form of attention was to play Harry hunting with his friends and beat Harry to a pulp. With Dudley's blessing had seen others, firstly around Little Winging, and then around his primary school, picking on him, bullying him and beating him. It had even bled into Stonewall High for the first couple of years, before Dudley's influence finally wore off those who no longer hung around him due to Dudley being at Smeltings. Safety was something Harry had always felt was achieved when he was alone, somewhere hidden or somewhere he could be anonymous. Thus why art and woodworking and even home economics, the 1 year that he'd taken it, had been good subjects for him. They were subjects that he could be left alone in. Here at Hogwarts, though, was different. Here he was constantly in the spotlight. Here he was sought out, not an uncommon occurrence in Harry's life, just the reasoning was different. Instead of wanting to beat him up, everyone here wanted to be seen in the company of the boy who lived and the TriWizard Champion. He tried sticking close to his 4 tutors. Hermione, Neville, Susan and Daphne had all seemed very nice the day he'd spent with them when he'd first arrived, and he'd even gone to bed that night dreaming about the possibility of perhaps even macking Frencher. Every meal he'd sat a different house table with one of them, attempting to get to know them better while also meeting others. Unfortunately, it seemed that his stunt in the Great Hall that very first lunch with Draco Malfoy had backfired spectacularly. Oh, yes, he'd proven his point about being biased towards someone just because of who their parents were, and he was pretty sure that he'd nipped that potential bullying in the bud. But it was his light ball that had caused so much difficulty. Who knew that something that he'd taught himself to do, and now did so effortlessly, would be considered so awe-inspiring? Wordless and wandless magic, they'd called it, something that was apparently nearly unheard of in one so young. That had led to even more people wanting to be near him and the constant questions of whether he could teach them how to do it. And he'd thought that he was there simply to learn. More fool him, apparently. Today, Saturday, a day when there were no classes, was particularly bad. He'd wandered the library that morning, marveling at the bizarre non-filing system that was used and shaking his head at the thought of trying to find what he needed in there. And the entire time that he was in there, he'd been followed through the stacks by giggling bands of girls, as though he was some kind of rock star, and them his groupies. Eventually, the feeling of being trapped had become too much, and he'd escaped all the way out of the castle. People flying high over some kind of pitch on broomsticks had caught his attention, and he'd been drawn along to watch. Seated high above the ground in one of the stands, Harry marveled as he watched the game. It made absolutely no sense whatsoever, but it was fascinating all the same. There was obviously a keeper guarding three hoops, and 7 players on each team and 3, half a different balls all in play at once. The fact that 2 of those balls were constantly rocketing around the pitch, trying to knock people off of their brooms, simply made it the most dangerous game that Harry'd ever seen. He'd only managed to be there about 5 minutes before people started noticing that he was there. Then had come the hordes. In what seemed a flash, the stands surrounding him had been filled, and he was getting commentary from 4 different sources all at once. And they'd packed in so tightly around him that it was as though he was a sardine in a tin, making it impossible to escape. He'd been forced to stay until the game had finally concluded. That was when he'd rushed straight back to his quarters. Lunch would have been nice, but he'd missed enough meals over the years that one more wasn't going to make any difference. And so he'd thrown himself into tidying up the large workroom in the 3rd compartment in his trunk from the unshrunken mess that Mr. Crouch had left on the floor. Once he had done so, he already had a first project in mind, a perch for Hedwig. A faint knocking sound echoed down the stairs leading back up to his main quarters, and Harry paused, his head tilted, a large plank of oak in his hands. After a minute it came again, and he realized what it must be. Sir Roderick knocking on his door. It had taken Harry 3 visitors before he'd finally accepted that the stone statue stationed outside his door also liked to announce his visitors in such a fashion. Split between the notion that it could simply be a teacher, but knowing that it was probably another one of the people looking to latch onto the famous new kid in the castle. Harry placed the plank on the large workbench in the center of the room before making his way up out of his trunk, through his bedroom, and across the sitting room to the door. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door, a fake half-smile plastered on his face. "Yes," he asked, and then stopped. The woman standing before him was someone that he'd never seen before. She certainly had never been at the staff table during any meal, and the dark blue robes that she wore left breast, embroidered with some kind of badge in the shape of a shield, also indicated that she wasn't a teacher. He guessed that this woman was in her late middle age. At the very least, she was older than Aunt Petunia, but younger than Professor McGonagall. Her grey hair was close cropped, highlighting her square-shaped jaw. The woman's most distinguishing feature, though, had to be the monocle that she wore over her right eye. It definitely gave her a very serious, no-nonsense look, and Harry instinctively knew that this was someone not to cross. "Mr. Potter, my name is Madam Amelia Bones." I am the head of the Magical Law Enforcement Department with the Ministry of Magic, she stated. Harry blinked, processing what he'd just heard and translating it into Muggle. You're a magical police officer, he finally replied. Nice to meet you. Would you like to come in? Thank you, Mr. Potter, she nodded before stepping through the door. Did you say your name was Amelia Bones? Harry asked. Any relation to Susan Bones here at Hogwarts? Yes, indeed, Mr. Potter. Susan's my niece, she replied, a small smile softening her features considerably. Susan's nice, Harry told her. She's going to be one of my tutors in defense, charms, and magical creatures, I believe. Yes, she wrote me about that, Madam Bones replied. What is it that I can do for you, Madam Bones? Harry asked. Even though he suspected that he knew the answer, after all, he'd learnt that it was never wise to show that you knew too much when dealing with figures of authority. I wanted to meet with you about the fact that your name was drawn out of a magical item that it should not have been in the first place, she stated. That's right. I think that Mr. Crouch mentioned that you would, Harry replied. Would you prefer to talk up here, or would you like to come downstairs? Downstairs, Mr. Potter, Madam Bones asked, raising one eyebrow. I did not know that Hogwarts offered guest quarters with multiple levels. Oh no, they don't, Harry replied. Mr. Bagman suggested that I buy a trunk with 3 compartments in it, and one of them goes down into a huge room. I was just down there tidying it up before you arrived. In that case, here will be fine, Mr. Potter, Madam Bones told him. I have no need to see your personal belongings. Okay, and it's Harry, ma'am, just Harry, Harry told her. As you wish, Harry, she said as they settled themselves into the 2 armchairs in front of the coffee table. Now, as I said, I am here in relation to the incident that took place on the 31st of October of this year, namely, your name being drawn out of the Goblet of Fire, making you the 4th champion in the TriWizard tournament, Madam Bones began. From just those very facts alone, there were obviously a number of laws broken that need to be investigated. Firstly, we are seeking the perpetrator who charmed the goblet with such a strong confunder charm that it overrode even a goblin-enchanted object. Then there is the fact that your name, the name of a person who was clearly underage at the time, was entered into the tournament against the rules. Before we get to the last felony that I suspect has occurred, there are a number of questions that I need to ask you and a test that I need to conduct. Okay, Harry agreed, waving for her to continue. Were you at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry on the dates of October 30 and October 31 of this year? She asked. No, ma'am, Harry replied instantly. I was in Surrey, either at my aunt and uncle's house, at school, or at work. Did you have any knowledge that the TriWizard tournament was due to be held here at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry over the next 10 months? No, ma'am, Harry replied. I'd never even heard of it until Mr. Crouch and Mr. Bagman came to my house on October 31. Madam Bones nodded, hesitated, and asked the next question, even though Harry could already tell that she knew what the answer was going to be. So you did not either place your name into the Goblet of Fire or ask anyone to do it for you, either verbally, in a written form, or using any inference at all? No, ma'am, Harry stated emphatically. Thank you, Harry, Madam Bones said. Considering your circumstances, I didn't expect anything different. Now, if I may, I need to perform a test. At his nod, she pulled from her pocket a small case, opened it, and levitated a piece of singed paper out of it onto the coffee table using her wand. Then, her wand was moved in an intricate pattern above the paper before that same pattern was repeated in Harry's direction. Finally, she nodded and slipped the paper, case, and wand away. As expected, the paper that came out of the Goblet of Fire carries your magical signature, Madam Bones stated. How is that possible? Harry asked, and then, a moment later, and why was it expected? In answer to your second question, it was expected Because the Goblet accepted you as a legitimate participant for the TriWizard tournament, and then bound you to the tournament with a magical contract, Madam Bones explained. As to your first question, I believe that finding out the answer to that question will lead us to the answers to my original questions. Somehow, someone got a hold of a piece of paper that you had signed, thus also attaining your magical signature. Okay, Harry said slowly, trying to understand how that might be possible when he didn't even know any magical people before Mr. Crouch and Mr. Bagman had turned up on his doorstep, well apart from Hagrid, of course, but he was sure that he would have noticed a 12-foot man lurking around Surrey. I will, of course, keep you completely up to date with our investigation, Madam Bones promised. If I may, one last question that may or not have any bearing on this case. Sure, Harry shrugged. Why did you agree to compete in a magical contest that you have no hope of being able to compete in, or even the possibility of winning? Oh, that's easy, Harry told her. It got me out from being stuck at Privet Drive 4 years early. I take it that you do not like being with your relatives, Madam Bones asked slowly, a frown etched on her face. That would be putting it mildly, Harry deadpanned. I see, Madam Bones replied. Thank you for your time, Harry. I will be in touch. Thank you, ma'am, Harry replied, showing her out. /0v0 / Monday, 7 November 1994. Potion Lab, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry eagerly slipped into the potions laboratory, located in the most unusual place of a dungeon of a castle, and looked around. It was a dark pit of a room, lit by only a dozen or so torches in wall sconces. Some small window high up on one side of the room would probably let in additional light during the day, but did absolutely nothing for now. Cupboards and shelves full of unidentifiable jars and buckets lined the walls. A dozen old wooden benches were lined up in 2 rows, obviously for the students, while the teacher's desk and blackboard sat upon the small raised area at the opposite end of the room. To one side of the platform was an extra door leading to only Harry could guess where. Take a seat, Mr. Potter, a cold voice drawled. Harry's gaze shifted as he walked further into the room to find the owner of that voice. His eyes narrowed as he finally made out the dark shape hidden in the shadows of one corner. The teacher, Professor Snape, wore deep black robes, making him all but impossible to notice until he had spoken. His sallow skin being half hidden behind curtains of greasy black hair didn't help either. As he was the only one to be taking this class, Harry chose a seat at the front left-hand desk. You are here to learn the subtle art of potion making, Professor Snape stated in a voice that, while being a near whisper, clearly carried throughout the room. I hope you've been studying ahead. I have, sir, Harry told him. At least, I've read the first half-dozen chapters off magical drafts and where to find them. That is something, however disappointing an amount it actually is, Snape commented. You should, at the very least, have an idea of what potions entails. Harry nodded thoughtfully. I think so. From what I can tell, it seems to be a mixture of chemistry and cooking, only using magical ingredients to get the potion to produce the desired result. Snape's horrified expression clearly indicated that he was less than impressed with Harry's explanation. Potions is an art form. It takes much more than simple wand-waving or cooking skills to produce the required result, Snape informed him with disgust. After Harry had nodded uncertainly, Snape continued. Now, as you have read so far ahead, the sarcasm here was impossible to miss, and Harry wondered what he'd done to earn such scorn from this teacher. You should have no problem with preparing the ingredients for and preparing today's potion. At that pronouncement, Snape whirled and tapped the board with his wand. Instantly, the directions for making the boil cure potion appeared. Harry nearly gagged at just the thought of some of the ingredients: snake fangs, horned slugs, porcupine quills, and flabberworm mucus, amongst others. Ingredients are in that cupboard to your left. You have 1 hour. Begin, Professor Snape instructed before promptly sitting behind his desk. Harry stared at his teacher. That was it. That was the extent of his very first lesson in potion making. Here's the instructions. Begin. Where were the details, instructions, and demonstrations on how to prepare the ingredients? Where were the safety instructions? Where was the safety equipment? Was he simply going to sit there, instead of giving personalized instructions? Shaking his head, Harry decided to make the best of things. At least, he figured, he'd decided to keep his old chemistry equipment and bring it to Hogwarts with him. Reaching into his bag, he began to take out the things that he'd need: cauldron, silver knife, brass scales. And then, after a few seconds' thought, he began setting up the way his old chemistry teacher had once shown him. His lecture pad and pen went to one side to copy down the steps that he did and to note his observations. His old lab coat was pulled out and slipped on, and then the goggles and nose and mouth mask were placed on as well. "Potter, what do you think you are doing?" Snape drawled. "Preparing to make the potion," Harry replied, after moving the mask away from his mouth. "And what is all of that?" Snape asked, waving his hand derogatorily as he rounded his desk and approached. Harry waited for his inspection to be completed before continuing. "Is that Muggle science equipment?" Snape asked, disgust clear in his voice. "Ah, yes, sir," Harry replied, self-consciously. "It's just standard safety equipment, sir." "Superfluous," Snape declared. "Remove it. I don't want to see it in this classroom again." Harry stared at the man. "Take it off. Make these potions without any sort of safety equipment whatsoever." He shook his head. It had been drilled into him far too much for him to do such a stupid thing. "But what if there's an accident?" Harry asked tentatively. "This stuff is designed to keep me safe." Snape stared at him down his long, hooked nose. "That is what Madame Pomfrey and the hospital wing are for. Now, remove that Muggle nonsense." Harry's eyes narrowed. The man's mind was obviously made up, and he'd been so looking forward to this. No proper instructions, no safety gear. This was not a classroom. This was an accident waiting to happen. Deliberately, Harry removed his lab coat, safety glasses, and mask and put them back in his bag. Next went his pad and pen, quickly followed by the cauldron, knife, and scales. "I did not say to put it all away, Potter," Snape snapped. "How are you supposed to make your potion without your cauldron?" "I'm not, sir," Harry replied, picking up the strap of his bag. "I'm sorry, sir. I was really looking forward to learning potions, but I refuse to do so under such unsafe conditions. I'm sorry for wasting your time." And before the professor could retort, Harry had spun around and strode from the room. Chapter 9. Magical Intent. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Tuesday, 8 November 1994. Headmaster's Office, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. "The brat refuses to be taught," Severus Snape spat. Harry scowled. He'd been called much worse over the years, not to mention that he'd been blamed for worse things, but this time he'd decided to stand his ground. The two of them were in the headmaster's office, Harry seated in the chair that he'd been offered, the professor prowling about, his black robes billowing about as he stalked. "Now, Severus, name-calling isn't going to get us anywhere," Headmaster Dumbledore stated lightly, his blue eyes twinkling behind his glasses. From the corner of his eye, Harry saw Snape's grimace deepen. "This is obviously about last night's potion lesson," Headmaster Dumbledore observed. "Perhaps if you tell me exactly what happened." The prowling stopped as Snape spun to stare at the headmaster. Potter arrived. I gave him the same instructions that I'd give any first-year class on their very first lesson, instructed him to make the Boyle Cure Potion, and then he refused to do so and left. Harry's eyes widened. He had to admit that it was, in essence, correct, wholly misleading but accurate. He also had to really wonder how anyone managed to learn the subject if that was the standard lesson plan that was given. A few grandiose statements, followed by the appearance of the potion's instruction on the blackboard. "Is Professor Snape's description of events accurate, Harry?" Headmaster Dumbledore asked. "In essence, I guess," he grudgingly allowed, "although I would have provided more detail." "So, you did walk out of Professor Snape's lesson?" Headmaster Dumbledore persisted. Harry's eyes narrowed. It was obvious who the headmaster favored here, and it wasn't the truth. He'd expected to at least be asked for his version of events. "I felt that I had no choice to," Harry replied carefully. "May I ask what prompted you to feel that way?" Headmaster Dumbledore asked, a flick of his eyes going to his potions master. Harry suppressed his feeling of triumph. Now, he could tell his side of the story. "I felt that it would be unwise to stay in the classroom and create a potion in a situation that was highly dangerous," he replied. "Dangerous?" Snape spluttered. "My classrooms are not dangerous unless the dunderheads inside it can't follow instructions properly. I was given no instructions or demonstrations towards how to prepare the ingredients or make the potion, other than the appearance of the instructions on the blackboard. A copy of what could be found in my textbook," Harry stated, having ignored the hook-nosed man's outburst. "There were no safety instructions issued, nor any safety gear supplied or pointed out. And when I attempted to use my lab coat, protective glasses and face mask, items that are mandatory in any normal high school's chemistry class when dealing with potentially volatile substances, the professor forbade their use and stated that they were never to be brought to his classroom again. I've had it drummed into me how important the right safety equipment is, not only in chemistry class, but even in simply working acquiatings, that I wasn't going to put myself into an unsafe environment. So I left," Harry finished simply. "Muggle nonsense," Snape spat, throwing his arms up in the air. "Perhaps that sort of thing is needed out there, but not here where we have a hospital wing and Pomfrey who can fix anything in a thrice." Headmaster Dumbledore sat back, his elbows on the arms of his chair, hands steepled before him. His eyes never seemed to leave Harry as he thought. "Professor Snape is correct, Harry," the headmaster finally said. "Magical healing is 1,000 times more effective in the case of accidents. With all due respect, sir, I'd rather not need the services of the hospital wing in the first place," Harry stated adamantly. "Nevertheless, potions is a required subject, and while you are learning it from Professor Snape, you must abide by his rules within his classroom," Headmaster Dumbledore ruled, eliciting a smirk from Snape. "In that case, sir, I request another teacher," Harry stated formally. "Professor Snape is one of the leading potion masters in the country, Harry. You would be hard-pressed to find anyone better at potion making than he is," Headmaster Dumbledore countered. "That's fine, sir. I'll take a less knowledgeable one if they're more safety-conscious and can give better instructions than, 'The ingredients are in the cupboard, the instructions are on the board, begin,'" Harry stated. Dumbledore's hand snapped up, cutting off whatever Snape's outburst was going to be. "I'm afraid that while you are in at Hogwarts, you are required to take your instructions from Professor Snape," Headmaster Dumbledore stated in a tone of voice that said that the discussion was now closed. "I see," Harry replied, his eyes narrowed. "If that is all, sir, I will be going. I have a study session this morning." "Of course, Harry, of course," Headmaster Dumbledore stated lightly. Harry strode from the room, his brain already whirling with ideas. /0v0 / Tuesday, 8 November 1994. Great Hall, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. "Brass ones, brother of mine," a lanky redhead stated as he and his twin plunked onto the bench across from Harry. "Great brass ones," the other corrected. "Indeed," the first nodded. "How could it be otherwise?" "Definitely Gryffindor material," the second observed. "No other house would simply do," the other agreed. "Welcome to Hogwarts, young Harry," they grinned together. "You are going to make life here very interesting," the second added. "And become even more of a legend than you already are," the other agreed. Harry felt as though he had been trapped in some kind of weird tennis match, but where words were volleyed backwards and forwards between two identical opponents instead of tennis balls. "Would you two stop that?" he asked. "You're going to give me whiplash." "No can do, young Harrikins," one replied, with a shake of their head. "We always talk like this," the other stated, shaking their head in direct counterpoint to their brother. "Who are you?" Harry decided to try. "We're the Weasleys. I'm Fred," the one on the right said. "And I'm George," the other introduced before pausing to look suspiciously at his brother. "Hang on, I thought it was going to be Fred today." The one Harcourt Fred waved a dismissive hand. "Too late, I'm Fred now." "Would you settle for being Forge so I can be Gred?" his twin asked. "I can agree to that," the other agreed. Then with a nod, they turned back to Harry. "Hi, I'm Gred," the one who was supposed to be Forge said. "And I'm Forge," the other grinned. Harry's mouth moved without a sound coming out of it. Finally, he simply shook his head and decided not to even bother trying to address either one of them by any sort of name. "Weasley," he eventually latched on to. "I take it you're related to Ron." The two grimaced. "We'll never admit to anything. There's nothing you can prove to link us to the kid." Once again, Harry felt his mouth move up and down before he was finally able to get his voice to work. "Okay, perhaps you'd be able to explain your comments from before," Harry tried. "Well, you see, we were observing that you must have big brass ones." "Massive brass ones," the other corrected. "Massive brass ones, to have the guts to walk out on the greasy git." It only took a fraction of a second for Harry to connect the greasy git with Snape's clearly unwashed hair. "I simply wasn't going to work in an unsafe environment," Harry shrugged. He didn't supply and wouldn't allow safety gear. "An interesting concept there, safety gear," one twin observed. "Especially after all of the accidents that we've had over the years," the other agreed. "This could be something that we should look into. We heard that you brought some Muggle stuff with you." "Could you show us?" one twin asked. "Sure," Harry agreed. "Come by before dinner, and I can show you what I brought with me." "Would you mind if we replicated it?" the twin on the right asked. "As long as it doesn't hurt mine, I don't see a problem," Harry allowed. The twin on the left waved off his concerns before turning to his brother. "Could be a real money spinner. And the ultimate prank." "Indeed," the other nodded eagerly, obviously on the same wavelength. "Can you imagine an entire class turning up wearing it? Have to keep it away from Dad, though." "Too right," the other agreed, before turning back to Harry to explain. "Our Dad's heavily into anything Muggle, just can't leave off taking things apart. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Do the same sort of thing ourselves. Just with spells and potions and things, instead of Muggle gadgets." Harry had the feeling that this was going to be a long lunch, incredibly interesting, but long, and he was certain that he'd need an aspirin by the end of it. /0v0 / Tuesday, 8 November 1994. Charms Classroom, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. "Good evening, Mr. Potter," the diminutive teacher called cheerily. "Come in, come in." Closing the door behind him, Harry approached the front of the room where he could see the teacher standing on a pile of books. Harry blinked, but then reconsidered. He guessed that it made the tiny teacher who reminded him strongly of the goblins that he'd seen at Gringotts able to see the entire classroom. But why he simply didn't use a platform, he had no idea. "Well, are you ready for your first lesson in charms?" Professor Flitwick asked. "Yes, sir," Harry replied, dumping his bag on one desk. "No need for that," Professor Flitwick commented, stopping Harry as he began to pull a pad and pen out of his bag. "I thought that we'd concentrate on practical work for now, and I'd assign you chapters to read during your individual study time," Professor Flitwick stated. Then, even more eagerly than he'd already been, he continued. Before we begin, I was wondering if you'd show me that marvelous light that I've heard so much about. Sure, Harry replied with a shrug. Then, lifting one hand and opening his palm, Harry willed the ball of light to appear. Wonderful, wonderful, Professor Flitwick exclaimed, clapping his hands together in delight. Now, I've heard that you can make it brighter. As he did that day in the Great Hall, Harry concentrated on pushing his magic into the light, just as Susan had instructed. Once again, the ball grew and magnified in intensity. Excellent, Mr. Potter, excellent. If you'd allow it to return to its former brightness, Professor Flitwick asked. Harry did so, blinking the spots out of his eyes. Can you make it do anything else? Professor Flitwick asked. I can make it change colors, Harry replied. Then, after a gesture of encouragement, Harry willed the ball of light to change from white to red to green to yellow to blue, and then to a deep black that pulsed with an otherworldly light. Marvelous, simply marvelous, Professor Flitwick declared. You can let it go now, Mr. Potter. Harry did so, and smiled at the beaming teacher. That was a truly excellent display of not only wandless, but also silent spellcasting, Professor Flitwick observed. Now, what I'd like us to do is to work on that aspect of your magic, as well as the ordinary wand work that I had prepared for us to do. Okay, Harry agreed. Let us begin with that same light spell. Take out your wand, Mr. Potter. Flicking his wrist the way that Mr. Ollivander had taught him when he'd sold him the wand holster, Harry's Rowan and Willow wand shot into his hand. He still marveled at the amazing way that Mr. Ollivander had woven the two woods together. Primarily, the wand was a deep red, indicating its Rowan wood base. The willow was evident in the pattern of white wood that wove upwards from the handle, reminiscent of a vine of leaves growing towards the sun. In general, Professor Flitwick began, spells are a combination of three elements: wand movement, incantation, and magical will or intent. Silent casting, or non-verbal casting, which you were doing when you created your ball of light, negates one part of that equation, but it is probably the smallest part of casting a spell. Now, to produce the same effect, that is, creating light using your wand, the Lumos spell, you are able to drop an additional part of the equation, in this instance, wand movement. This is probably one of the simplest spells in existence. Simple magical willpower or intent is all that is needed. Most students begin by saying the incantation, in this case Lumos, as well, but I believe that you can probably forego that part. I want you to simply hold your wand in your hand and will light to appear. Watch me as I demonstrate. Harry watched intently as the tiny charms master lifted his wand, clearly stated, Lumos, and the tip of his wand lit up with a bright white light. To end the spell, the incantation is Nox, Professor Flitwick stated. Now your turn, Mr. Potter. Harry shifted the grip on his wand and focused on the end of it. Light was what he wanted, just like he'd been shown, and then it was there. The very tip of his wand now shone with a light that, while bright, was nowhere near as bright as what he could produce without a wand. Well done, Mr. Potter, Professor Flitwick congratulated. I knew that you'd be able to do it with ease. It's not as bright as when I do it without my wand, Harry pointed out. No, it's not, Professor Flitwick agreed. But you have to remember that you're now training your magic to produce the same effect through the medium of a conductor that you had previously trained to do otherwise. I would assume that you weren't able to produce your ball of light on the first try either. No, sir. That took me months and months of practice to do. Exactly. Magic is like a muscle. It must be trained up to do what we want, Professor Flitwick explained. The fact that you were able to train your magic the way you have already is astonishing. Using a wand will make that process infinitely easier, especially when you reach much harder spells. But it will take time to learn and to teach your magic to do what you want. Harry nodded in understanding as he let the light dissipate. Now, let's move on to a new charm, Professor Flitwick stated. This one is also relatively easy. It's called the Levitation Charm or Wingardium Leviosa. It will allow you to lift objects by magical intent alone, and as with any muscle, it needs to be trained up. Today, we'll start with making feathers float, but in time you'll have no problem levitating a chair, a desk, that cupboard, or even heavier items. We will begin with learning this charm through the use of your wand. However, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to accomplish the same feat without one. The incantation is obviously Wingardium Leviosa, and the wand movement is a simple swish and flick. Harry watched intently as Professor Flitwick demonstrating the charm by levitating a feather to above his head before he slowly allowed it to settle back down once more. "Your turn, Mr. Potter," Professor Flitwick encouraged. Harry stared at the feather. It was simply making it float. He knew that he could already get things to come to him, and that was sort of the same, just horizontal instead of vertical. His eyes flicked to the tiny teacher, who was watching just as intently, a smile on his face. Taking a deep breath, Harry focused on what he wanted to have happen. He could do this, he was sure of it. Well, mostly sure. Lifting his wand, he pointed it at the feather. "Wingardium Leviosa," he intoned. A small shudder rippled through the feather, but otherwise it stayed firmly in place. Frowning slightly at it, he tried again. "Wingardium Leviosa." This time, the feather twitched and jerked before lifting off of the desk a couple of inches before settling back down. Narrowing his eyes, Harry willed the feather to simply do as it was told. "Wingardium Leviosa." And obey it did. This time, the feather shot straight up, only to begin bouncing against the ceiling. "Well done, Mr. Potter. Well done indeed," Professor Flitwick squeaked, "although I fear that you may have put a little too much power into it. How about you bring it back to the desk and practice a few more times, this time concentrating on exactly the effect that you are wanting?" Harry's cheeks colored in embarrassment as he nodded his head. The next 15 minutes or so were spent with Harry practicing raising and lowering the feather, Professor Flitwick offering more and more compliments and less tips as the time wore on. "Very good, Mr. Potter. Now, before we end the lesson, how about you try the same charm, only this time without your wand?" With a nod, Harry slid his wand away into its holster. Whenever he wanted something to come to him, he'd hold out his hand. After chewing this over for a minute or so, he decided to simply point his finger at the feather. "Wingardium Leviosa," he tried, a slight warble in his voice indicating his uncertainty. As expected, absolutely nothing happened. "You need to believe it, Mr. Potter. Visualize what you want to have happen and make the magic do what you command," Professor Flitwick instructed. After a decisive nod at his teacher, Harry once more focused on the feather sitting quietly before him. The problem, he knew, was the fact that he was trying to do something that he wasn't used to. That is, command vocally. Concentrating on his pronunciation as well as his magic, in addition to visualizing what he wanted, was simply one too many things to do at once. Consequently, he decided to drop one. This time, with nary a sound escaping his lips, the feather did as it was told, lifting 1 foot, then 2 feet off of the table and hovering there in midair. "Oh, well done, Mr. Potter. Well done, indeed," Professor Flitwick exclaimed. Concentrating on his magic, Harry manipulated the feather's flight path, sending it higher and lower on command. Then, on impulse, he decided to tie in part of his other learned ability. Consequently, the feather promptly flew towards him before stopping 1/2 foot in front of his nose. "I think that we can safely say that this is one charm that won't take you long to master at all," Professor Flitwick beamed. Harry returned the smile as the feather bobbed merrily before him. /0v0 / Saturday, 12 November 1994. The grounds, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The sound of his name lifted Harry's head, and he looked up and around, blinking to refocus his eyes. To his right, he found Daphne, an annoyed expression on her face. "We were supposed to meet over half an hour ago," she stated accusingly. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Daphne," Harry apologized, glancing at his watch and wincing at the verification that it offered. "I lost track of time." "Obviously," she stated dryly, and then her curiosity seemed to get the better of her. "So, what kept you out here?" In answer, H turned his sketch pad towards her. A wave of nervousness swept through him as he awaited her opinion, a not uncommon sensation that occurred any time that he showed his work to others. Her eyes roved over the pad, and she sank to her knees. One hand tentatively reached out and touched a point of the drawing. Harry's eyes flicked between her shining blue orbs and the landscape sketch that he'd been working on for the past couple of hours. The vast majority of the page was filled with a massive tree whose limbs seemed to be in constant motion, despite the fact that the air was completely still. To one side, it showed the enormous lake. And in the foreground, the part that he was currently touching up, and the part that had drawn Daphne's complete focus, was a unicorn. Harry'd seen it earlier that morning, just as it had emerged from the dark forest. For nearly 5 minutes, it had stood there, allowing Harry to drink in the amazing sight. And then it had bounded away, disappearing between two massive oak trees back into the forest. "You did this?" Daphne asked in awe, lightly touching the charcoal unicorn once more. "Yeah," he admitted. "It's good," she stated, her eyes finally rising to meet his. Harry ran his eyes over the drawing once more, evaluating it. "It's not bad," he allowed. "Not bad," Daphne spluttered. "It's definitely a lot more than just not bad." Harry shrugged, still not completely comfortable with people praising his artwork, despite how often Mrs. Jensen, his Stonewall High art teacher, had lavished praise on his work. "Do you draw often?" Daphne asked. "Sometimes," Harry allowed. "It helps me distress." "If you can produce something like that just from distressing, then you should do it more often," Daphne declared, before shifting back to what had brought her out to find him in the first place. "As long as you're not doing it when I'm supposed to be tutoring you." "I am sorry, Daphne," Harry apologized again before inspiration struck him. "Would you accept this as an apology?" Once again, Daphne's eyes were drawn to the sketch pad. "You'd really give it to me?" she asked in awe. "Sure," Harry replied. "I'd pretty much finished it anyway." "In that case, yes, Mr. Potter, as payment for standing me up, I will gladly accept your offering," she said pompously before promptly erupting into a wide smile. Harry returned her smile as he detached the page from his sketch pad and handed it to her. "Thank you, Harry," Daphne said. "Are you ready for ancient runes now?" "Lead the way," Harry replied, rising to his feet and offering a hand down to help her up. Chapter 10. The Worst Sort of Secret Keeper. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Saturday, 12 November 1994. Hagrid's Hut, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry looked up and then up again into the great black beard of Hagrid. The way the whiskers moved, he was sure that the big man was smiling, but it was kind of hard to tell. Really, apart from his nose, there really wasn't a lot to see of Hagrid's face. Even his small black eyes were nearly hidden beneath his bushy black eyebrows. "Hi, Hagrid. Thanks for inviting me," Harry smiled. Come in then," Hagrid invited, stepping to the side of the door to his hut. Harry took a single step forward, and then his progress was halted. An enormous boarhound had rushed forward and leapt up, two massive paws landing on Harry's chest, while a great wet tongue began licking Harry's face. "Fang, get down, you dozy dog," Hagrid commanded, pulling at his collar. "Darn mind Fang, awry, wouldn't hurt a fly, he wouldn't." Harry nodded absently as he rubbed his glasses clean on his tie. The inside of Hagrid's hut appeared to be one great room. Off to one side was a massive bed, big enough for Hagrid or 3 or 4 normal-sized people. A rough handmade table and chairs took pride of place in the center of the room, a fact that made Harry wince. Hare had been able to produce better quality work after his first attempt at carpentry, and on the last side of the room was a collection of pots and pans and cupboards of all shapes and sizes. Horse hairs and small, dead animals, traps, and all manner of bric-a-brac hung from the rafters, all of it, thankfully, high above his head. "Sit down, then, and I'll get us some tea," Hagrid said, as he bustled across to the blazing fireplace where a kettle hung from a metal rod. Tentatively, Harry sat down, still interestedly looking around. A weight settled in his lap, and he blinked down at the massive dog head that he'd seemed to acquire. "Thank you for looking after Hedwig so well for all those years," Harry said. "You're welcome, awry," Hagrid beamed as he poured the tea. "Wasn't as though it was much of a hardship, really. She sort of tended to herself mostly." "Still, knowing that she was with you helped me not worry so much," Harry replied. "I'm Zeus, glad that you're finally here and can loo after yourself," Hagrid told him. Looking around, Harry searched for something to say to this virtual stranger. "Are all of these things from the forest?" he asked, indicating the rafters above. Yeah, ne'er know exactly what you're gonna find out there," Hagrid replied. "I've got unicorn air and this stral air, oh, course. Thar's acromantula silk, and in thar pouch is some wood lice in case I run into any boat truckles." "Wow," Harry said. Some of the creatures that Hagrid had just named, Harry'd never heard of before. Others, like the unicorn, he'd actually had the pleasure of seeing for himself. "What other animals are in the forest?" he asked. "Let's see," Hagrid said, lifting one hand to count them out on his fingers. "There's the horse breeds, unicorns, the strals, hippogriffs, and of course the ruddy stargazers themselves, the centaurs. The acromantula, they're giant spiders. My friend Aragog leads 'em. Then there's the smaller ones, boat truckles, fairies, nifflers, salamanders. Oh, course, there's the dragons they brought in the tournament in there, too, at the moment." Suddenly, Hagrid looked startled and shifted his eyes around quickly. "Probably shouldn't have mentioned Thar," he said. "Be obliged if you wouldn't have mentioned that tar anyone." Harry made a motion of zipping his lips together, which just seemed to confuse the big man across the table from him. "Don't worry, Hagrid. Your secret's safe with me. /0v0 / Sunday, 13 November 1994. The Library, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Usually, libraries were a safe haven for Harry. When he was younger, Dudley and his gang would never venture in one to continue their Harry hunting games, after all, and any bullying that happened at Stonewall was stymied by the same trick. Here at Hogwarts, though, the library wasn't quite an off-limits type of place. Oh, it'd probably work okay against bullies, but that wasn't what was annoying Harry right at that particular moment. No, here it was the crowds of giggling teenage girls that seemed to think hiding in the stacks, peering at him and whispering amongst themselves, was a good idea that was getting to him. At least out in the rest of the castle, it was possible to duck down a passageway somewhere and lose them, even if it did mean that he developed a bad habit of getting terribly lost more than once a day. And on the grounds, they had to keep their distance. But here in the library, grimacing to himself, Harry turned his back on the nearest ones and tried to concentrate on the subject in hand, namely dragons. Ever since Hagrid had let slip what he'd find in the first task, Harry'd been curious, especially after finding out that dragons weren't the stuff of myths and legends that he thought that they were. Not that he really should have thought any different after seeing the unicorn that other morning. As expected, dragons were considered one of the most dangerous creatures alive, even to wizards. Their skin was spell-resistant, not that he knew enough magic to do anything to even the lowliest of creatures. They breathed fire and could fly. Apparently, they also had one of the best eyesights around as well, even better than an eagle's. Harry spent the next little while leafing through the book in his hands. his eyes growing ever wider as he read about each of the 12 different types of dragons that could be found around the world. There was the relatively tame common Welsh green, the stunningly beautiful Antipodean opali, the highly venomous Peruvian vipertooth, and the most dangerous of them all, the Hungarian horntail. But it was the wizarding photos contained within the book that really had Harry mesmerized. Each moving picture of the dragons was awe-inspiring. They were magnificent creatures, and despite the fact that he was going to have to make some sort of token effort against one of them, he couldn't wait to see one up close. /0v0 / Monday, 14 November 1994. The entrance hall, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The sound of movement coming from outside the castle had Harry jumping to his feet from the bench that he was sitting upon. And it was not a moment too soon, for at that moment 2 people walked through the door, people that he was expecting. Mr. Crouch looked as straight-laced and immaculately dressed in wizard's robes as he did in a Muggle business suit. In fact, the robes that he wore could have been an alternate suit, seeing as these were a deep pinstriped blue, not unlike the suit that he'd worn. The elderly woman at his side was also expected, even though Harry hadn't known exactly who Mr. Crouch would be bringing. Harry pegged her age to be at least 70, but it was hard to tell, at least. She was definitely older than any teacher that he'd ever had before, and that included Mrs. Tomlinson, who'd retired halfway through his 3rd year at Stonewall. She was relatively short for an adult, only a hand span or 2 taller than Harry was, and thin with shoulders that had just begun to stoop. Her grey hair was cut short around her shoulders, and wrinkle lines were deep about her blue eyes and from the corners of her mouth. The pair of thin spectacles only seemed to enhance the way her eyes darted about, taking everything in. They came to rest on Harry himself, and he felt himself shifting nervously from foot to foot under her scrutiny. "Ah, Mr. Potter," Mr. Crouch greeted. "Mr. Crouch," Harry replied, shaking the proffered hand. "Thank you for organizing this for me." "It was my pleasure. After all, I got you here. It is only right that I keep an eye on how you're faring," Mr. Crouch stated. "May I present Madam Susan Walker?" "Ma'am, it's a pleasure to meet you," Harry said, shaking her hand. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Potter," she smiled. "And to have a student again, and to get out from being stuck at home doing nothing but potter around in the garden is wonderful. Really, there's only so many times you can pull the same weed or prune the same hedge." Harry grinned, relating instantly to the monotony that she was talking about. After all, gardening had been one of the constant chores that he'd had at the Dursleys. Madam Walker was one of the premier potion mistresses in the country in her day, Mr. Crouch told Harry, only to find the lady in question turning piercing eyes on him. "What do you mean, in her day? I'll have you know that my day is not over yet, and you'll find that I am still one of the best potion mistresses in the country." A flustered Crouch quickly began backpedaling, causing Harry to smile in amusement. He could already tell that Madam Walker was going to be a no-nonsense type of teacher. All that was left to do was to find out how she felt about safety in her lab. "Madam, if I may," Harry began, catching her attention. "I was wondering if you could tell me a little about your expectations of classroom work that you'd have of me." Madam Walker eyed him speculatively before answering. "I will expect you to follow instructions, and I can assure you that there will be a lot of them until I can be certain that you can make a potion without either blowing yourself or me up." "So you're big on safety then," Harry clarified. "That should go without saying, Mr. Potter," Madam Walker stated. "Potions is an exacting art that utilizes a myriad of dangerous and volatile ingredients. Unless you know exactly what you are doing, from the best way to prepare ingredients to the different types of reactions that you can expect by mixing them together, accidents can and will happen. Safety should always be paramount, even for an experienced potions mistress like myself." "You're hired," Harry beamed. "Mr. Potter, Professor Snape is the potions master in this school," Headmaster Dumbledore stated from behind him. Harry whirled around in surprise. He hadn't even heard the old man approach. "That may be Dumbledore," Mr. Crouch stated, "but I was contacted by Mr. Potter, and after hearing his list of concerns concerning Professor Snape, the Ministry decided that Mr. Potter was entitled to alternate instruction, thus Madam Walker. From what I have been hearing for the past 10 years, I've suspected that Mr. Snape has been doing more harm to the profession of potion-making than good," Madam Walker stated. "And after hearing about the first lesson that Mr. Potter endured, I know that is the fact. He is wise to get away from Mr. Snape before he learns bad habits." But Dumbledore began, before being interrupted by Crouch. "You must remember, Dumbledore, that Mr. Potter here is not a student of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. For now, while Hogwarts is providing to his educational needs, it is being overseen by the Ministry of Magic." Only by watching extremely closely was Harry able to notice the thin line that the old man's lips had become for a fraction of a second. That, and the momentary dulling of those twinkling blue eyes, assured Harry that the headmaster wasn't happy about this in the slightest. "Now, I assume that you have somewhere in the castle where Mr. Potter and I can hold our lessons?" Madam Walker asked, although Harry could tell that it wasn't really a question. "Of course," Headmaster Dumbledore finally replied. "Let me show you the way to the dungeons." "The dungeons," Madam Walker repeated in obvious surprise. "No, I'm sorry, that simply will not do. Potion-making inevitable involves the creation of fumes. We will need somewhere with proper ventilation. Perhaps you have an unused classroom on the second or third floor, preferably one with windows." Once again, the old headmaster frowned. "I think that we may have something that fits that description." At her gesture, Dumbledore began heading towards the nearest staircase. Harry paused to nod his thanks to Mr. Crouch before following along. He suspected that he was going to quite enjoy learning potions with Madam Walker. /0v0 / Sunday, 19 November 1994. Quidditch pitch, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. "Come along, Mr. Potter, come along," Madam Hooch instructed impatiently as he entered the stadium. In response, Harry lengthened his stride. Not that he'd been dawdling before that, he'd been too excited to do that. Learning to ride a broom had seemed such a quintessential thing for magic users to do that he knew that he had to do it too. After all, that was a big part of what had had him going into quality Quidditch supplice in the first place, not to mention buying Nimbus 2000 that was currently sitting on his shoulder. "Now, we don't have long, Mr. Potter," the golden-eyed flying instructor told him. "The Hufflepuff Quidditch team have just finished their practice session, and the Ravenclaws have the pitch booked from 12. Have you ever been on a broom before?" "Briefly," he replied. "The shop where I bought my broom had a practice area where I could get a bit of a feel for the broom before I bought it." "Very well," Madam Hooch nodded. "Right then, let's see you mount it." Laying the broom on the ground, Harry placed his hand over it like he'd been shown and commanded, "Up." Exactly as it had done in the shop, the nimbus leapt into his hand, causing Harry's already ever-present grin to widen. Then it was simply a matter of swinging one leg over and taking a hold of his broom. Madam Hooch's expert eye scrutinized him before she reached forward and readjusted one of his hands minutely and nodding in satisfaction. "Right then, we're going to take it slow and steady to start with. Don't want any accidents, do we? When I say I want you to gently push off the ground, rise a couple of feet, hover and then lean forward to return to the ground," she instructed. Harry nodded, his understanding. "When you're ready, then." Bending his knees slightly, Harry pushed off. A feeling of intense exhilaration infused him at the feeling of flying, even at this incredibly low altitude. After hovering at Madam Hooch's head height for a minute, he leant forward, guiding the broom back to the ground. "Very well done, Mr. Potter," the flying instructor stated. "Now, when you're ready, what I want you to do is to lift off to the same height and then fly around me in a wide circle. Once you've orbited twice, I want you to land once more. Just remember, this is not a race. A nice, slow, gentle pace is all that I want for now." "Yes, ma'am," Harry assured her. Then, gathering himself, he pushed off, rose, and began to fly. Harry quickly found that, while he was still guiding the broom with his hands, it was almost as though he knew instinctively what to do. Obediently, he kept his pace to little more than a walk, although he was itching to go faster, much, much faster. "Excellent, Mr. Potter. Now we'll go back the other way," Madam Hooch instructed. And so the lesson progressed, circling, figures of 8, faster paces and stopping, different heights and finally combining it all together. "You handle your broom well, Mr. Potter," Madam Hooch stated once he was safely back on the ground. "We have a few minutes left, so the pitch is yours. But do remember that this is still your first time on a broom, nothing outrageous, if you please." After a quick agreement, Harry took off. He shot straight up, feeling the wind begin to whip at his clothes the faster that he went. As he reached the height of the stands, he leant to the left, taking his broom for a lap. Once, twice, 3 times he circled, each time faster and faster. Seeing the 3 tall goals nearby, Harry veered off, weaving in and out of them before hurtling down the pitch, through the middle ring, down, around, up and back through the ring on the right. Feeling daring, he sped up and pulled his broom completely straight up before pushing it even harder, up and over in a loop-the-loop, an exhilarated whoop of delight bursting from him. And then it was zigging and zagging around the pitch, in more and more erratic patterns the more confident he felt. Blurs of blue and silver began appearing around him, and he realized that the Ravenclaw Quidditch team had arrived. A speck of gold caught his attention, and without thinking, he sped off after it. A sharp crack of a robe signaled someone flying alongside him, and he took a quick second to grin at the girl flying alongside him, her long black hair streaming out behind her. With a laugh, Harry increased his speed, leaving her behind in pursuit of that elusive gold ball. Its movements suddenly became predictable, and Harry reached forward, snagging it out of the air, laughing even more as he did so. Spinning to a stop, he looked down at the struggling gold ball, its silver gossamer wings straining to get airborne again, and he obliged it, tossing it as far away as he could, only to see the girl spin about and begin chasing it again. The sight of Madam Hooch standing in the middle of the pitch, her hands akimbo, instantly sobered him, and he dropped to the ground. "If that is what you call doing nothing outrageous, then I shudder to think what you're going to be like if you ever join a Quidditch team," Madam Hooch declared. "But for now, you're certified to fly whenever you'd like to." /0v0 / Wednesday, 23 November 1994. Harry's quarters, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Carefully, Harry wiped the excess glue away, checked the clamps one last time, and sat back. His eye ran along his work, evaluating it, checking for imperfections. Finding the beginnings of what will eventually become a display cabinet exactly as it should be, he nodded. He'd always wanted somewhere to display the figurines that he'd carved, and tonight seemed as good a time as any to get started on the project. The fact that he knew that he would be tossing and turning all night was simply a happy convenience. Hopefully, keeping his hands busy and his mind focused would be enough to tire him out. He doubted it somehow, but he could always hope. Tomorrow was the day. The first task. And there'd be dragons. Oh, Mr. Crouch and Mr. Bagman had dropped by just that afternoon to make sure that Harry knew that simply putting in a token effort would be enough to satisfy the goblet that he was bound to. But seriously, dragons. What was he supposed to do? Just ask them to do whatever it was that he was supposed to do. Harry shook his head. Yeah, right. He could see it now. He'd go out there, look completely stupid, and become the laughing stock of the castle. On the plus side, at least he wouldn't lose his magic. And he supposed everyone knew that he had no chance anyway, so maybe they'd be nice about it. He couldn't help but snort at that thought. No, if he was going to go out there anyway, he needed to at least get something good out of it for himself. Dragons. It all came back to the fact that there were dragons involved. That, at least, would be something. He'd get to see these legendary beasts. It'd be something to remember. His eyes roved the workroom as he thought, contemplating the dragon that he was going to get to see. And then his eyes fixed on one particular item. Now that, he thought, had possibilities. It would definitely be something to help him remember the event. A lopsided grin spread out across his face as he slid off the stool and crossed the room. Chapter 11, Ramaranth. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Thursday, 24 November 1994. The Great Hall, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. One thing that came from living with the Dursleys for all of those years was the fact that Harry'd learnt to survive with little. Little food, little clothes, little possessions, little private time, and little sleep. It was this last one that Harry was currently thankful for. After a night where he'd gone to bed late, and then promptly spent most of it tossing and turning, he could honestly say that he was bone-dead tired. But tired or not never got the chores done, or, in this case, the task performed. Breakfast that morning was spent at the Gryffindor table. After all, the three real champions had claimed the remaining tables as theirs. He didn't eat much, but again, that wasn't something that he was unused to. Token effort or not, soon he was going to be facing a dragon, and even his plan wasn't without an element of risk, no matter how small it was. If the champions would kindly make their way to outside the castle, Headmaster Dumbledore instructed, you will be shown where to go to prepare for your first task. The fork that Harry had been holding dropped with a clutter, and he pushed his way up from the table. Good luck, Harry, Hermione smiled. Thanks, he replied automatically. As he rounded the long table, Harry recognized the rounding applause and cheers that the other three champions were being given. Cedric, the one receiving most of the encouragement, looked quietly confident, if not a little shy about the whistles and catcalls that he was receiving. Fleur, the French champion, strode out of the hall with her nose high in the air, as if those around her were beneath her notice. And Crumb, the Durmstrang champion, acted exactly as if the renowned Quidditch star expected to win, and that there was simply no need for the others to even bother trying. The foursome met outside the great doors to the castle, where a bustling and beaming Ludo bagman showed them the way to the champion's tent. Harry couldn't help but shoot a nervous glance at a particular bush that they passed on their way around the Black Lake. The inside of the tent appeared much larger than it did on the outside. If Harry hadn't encountered this phenomenon before, he would likely have tried to back out and walk around it, much like he'd seen people do on the show Dr. However he'd been able to take a peek at the Dursleys' television. Each corner of the tent had been set up for a champion with a chair and a small table filled with bottles of water and a couple of towels. The center of the tent was left bare, and that was where Mr. Bagman had the four congregate. Yes, well, now that we're all here, it's time for a few instructions, Bagman stated. The task will begin once the stands are filled and the objects have been placed where they need to be. You will compete one at a time and will be judged on how long the task takes you, as well as how you accomplish that task. In a moment, I will be getting you to draw a model of the thing that you'll have to face out of this bag. Here he held up a simple leather sack. That will also give us your order. Oh, yes, there was one more thing that I had to tell you. Your task is simply to collect the golden egg. Harry looked around at his fellow champions. It was obvious that both Fleur and Crumb already knew what was about to happen. Cedric, though, simply looked confused and eager to find out. Right then, ladies first, Mr. Bagman stated, holding out the bag to Fleur. Harry watched her reach in, feel around for a minute, and then bring out a closed hand. Once she opened it, he recognized a miniature common Welsh green dragon. one of the tamer breeds of dragon, he remembered. Beside him, he noticed Cedric's eyes grow incredibly wide as his Adam's apple bobbed up and down. Looking closer at the miniature green dragon, Harry saw that it had a tiny collar on it with the number 2 attached. The bag was next offered to Victor, who pulled out a model of a Chinese fireball, complete with a collar proclaiming that Crumb was destined to compete third in the task. Next was a nervous Cedric, whose face had gone strangely blank by the time that he pulled out the number 1 dragon, the Swedish short snout. And then it was Harry's turn. Thrusting his hand inside the bag, he closed his fist around the only thing that he could feel. Curiously, he opened his hand to find an exact replica of the Hungarian horntail curled up on his hand. Slowly, it unfurled its neck, lifting its head to sniff the air, revealing the tiny number 4 attached to its collar. Harry stared down at it, a fact that the miniature dragon didn't seem to like, judging by the tiny burst of flames that erupted from its nostrils. With his eyes fixed on the dragon in his hand, Harry backed away, somehow unconsciously finding a chair to fall into. The sound of the first whistle sounding, promptly followed by Cedric leaving the tent, barely registered in his mind. During the next couple of hours while he waited, Harry used the time to study the tiny dragon that had finally curled up on his table and gone to sleep. His eyes roved over the tiny thing. It was covered in jet black scales, except, of course, for the parts that gave it its name. Those, the long horns and the myriad of spikes covering its long, slender tail, were bronze. Its eyes, when it deigned to open them to check on Harry's whereabouts, were a swirling yellow. He studied its lines and marking, how each leg joint was connected to the rest of its body, the number of toes that it had, including what looked to be razor-sharp claws, and even how its neck snaked around. This, he knew, would work as a substitute if his plan with the real thing didn't work out. "Mr. Potter," a voice roused him from his introspection. Blinking profusely, Harry looked up and around. The tent, he found, was devoid of any other champion, meaning that he'd missed the others leaving for their turns. In their place was a single ministry official. "Mr. Potter," the slim redhead repeated, adjusting his horn-rimmed glasses as he spoke. "When you hear the next whistle, that'll be your cue that your turn has arrived." Harry gave the young man a nod of understanding. Standing up, he picked up the closest glass of water and drained the lot in one go. A quick scoop of his hand deposited the miniature dragon into his pocket, where he hoped that it went back to sleep. He checked his sleeves, making sure that his wand holster was free of any obstructions, not that it'd actually do him much good if he was forced to draw the thing. Finally, he let out a long, slow breath and walked to the front of the tent. In the distance, a whistle sounded, and Harry moved, not wanting to even wait a second in case his nerves got the better of him. Emerging from the tent, he found that there was a short path between 2 towering stands for him to negotiate. As he stepped out from their shadow, he looked around. The stadium that he found himself in was surrounded by massive stands, all filled to capacity with witches and wizards of all ages. In an instant, he'd thrust every single one of them from his mind. There were more important things to worry about right then, like the gigantic dragon staked to the middle of the barren rocky arena in front of him. The creature was easily 4 or 5 times the size and weight of a bull elephant and looked none too happy about its current circumstances. A massive metal band wrapped around her neck, links of chain falling away to where it was anchored to the ground. Currently, the mother horntail was crouched protectively over the clutch of murky brown eggs lying in the crude nest on the ground. Her wings were half furled, and her long, sinewy neck was darting backwards and forwards as she searched for danger. A hint of gold near one of her back legs marked the golden egg that Bagman had mentioned. He was supposed to get past the tent, retrieve an egg from the middle of a dragon's nest. Harry shook his head at the impossibility of the task. Whatever the organizers of this tournament were thinking simply had to be either alcohol or drug-induced. There was simply no other way that Harry could even conceive of that they'd come up with this absurd idea. For a fraction of a second, he wondered how the other three champions had fared before pushing the thought from his mind. That was something that he could find out later. Now, there was only his turn to worry about. Supposedly, just by entering the arena for the first task, he'd done enough to fulfill his obligations. But Harry decided last night that he wanted something more than simply walking in and out of this to remember. Twisting his body side on, he lifted his hand back towards the way he'd come, pushed his magic and waited. What seemed an eternity later, but was in reality on a half-minute or so, a backpack flew through the air, coming to smack into his hand. With a small grunt, with the weight of it a counterpoint to the smile on his face from his accomplishment, Harry turned back to survey the ground before him. Much of the ground nearby was littered with rocks and boulders, making footing uneven at best. Frowning, Harry surveyed further afield, finally finding what he was looking for. With bag in hand, he slowly picked his way a quarter of the way around the arena, making sure to stay as close to the wall as possible. The dragon, of course, followed every move that he made, not only with her eyes, but her entire head and neck. Reaching the spot that he decided upon, Harry knelt down, placed the pack on the ground, and began to prepare. The first to emerge from its specially designed compartment was his easel. It was dutifully set up and adjusted slightly to the correct angle. Next to emerge from the expanded compartment area was a 2-foot by 3-foot canvas that was already attached to a wooden frame. This was set in place before the pack's extendable legs were pulled out, and the bag's neck opened wide, allowing for easy access to the many tubes of paint and brushes inside. A warning "Aruwa," followed by a jet of flame, was sent in his direction, causing Harry to frown somewhat. Although he was safe at this distance, the heat that the beast generated could be a problem. Ignoring it for now, Harry removed his palette and brushes and stood to survey his subject. The dragon hovering protectively over her eggs, the rocky backdrop around her, was perfect. Even the mix of colors, black, bronze, and yellow for the dragon, the sandy brown and gray rocks, and the murky brown and glinting gold egg would look perfect. Reaching into his bag, Harry pulled out the special potion that he'd need to make this painting magically animated once he was done. It was actually a 3-step process, the first of which, sealing the canvas with the potion he'd completed last night. Today, he needed to mix the potion in with the paints as he was painting it. The final part of the process he wouldn't be able to finish for a few days, not until the paints were completely dry, and that involved giving the completed work one last potion seal before a spell was activated over the drying potion. He just picked up his first tube of paint to begin when once again a jet of flame rocketed towards him, once again accompanied by a massive "Aruwa." "Section, would you quit that section?" Harry snapped. "Section, you're going to dry out my paints too quickly, section." A second "Aruwa" was cut off in a startled strangle, and the Hungarian horntail took a step closer to him, her neck weaving even as her eyes never left him. "Section, you speak, section." This time it was Harry who was startled, stumbling backwards and nearly tripping over a rock. "Section, you can understand me, section?" Harry asked. "Section, yes, speaker, section," the dragon replied. "Section, I didn't know that dragons could understand and speak English, section," Harry admitted. A low rumble erupted from the horntail's throat, which, while sounding ominous, Harry took to be laughter, judging by the dragon's next comment. "Section, it is not I who am speaking your language, speaker, but you who are speaking our section." "Section, oh section," Harry replied, before cocking his head in consideration. "Section, I knew that I could talk to snakes. I didn't know that I could talk to dragons as well, section." "Section, a speaker can speak to any of our kind, dragons, snakes, lizards, turtles, and the ones like lizards, but who live in water, section," the dragon informed him. "Section, I think that last one might be crocodile, section," Harry suggested. Then section, well, there you go, I learnt something new today, section. Section, it is always good to learn more about the world around you. Speaker section. The Horntail replied sagely. Harry nodded in reply, considering, his eyes switching between the dragon and his canvas. Section, what do you hear? Speaker section. Section, to be honest, do you have a name? Section, Harry asked. Section, I am honored that you would ask. My name is Ramaranth. Section, she replied. Section, nice to meet you, Ramaranth. I'm Harry. Section. Ramaranth nodded her great head in greeting. Section, to answer your question. Section, Harry replied. Section, I've been put in a contest. I'm supposed to be trying to get that golden egg that the other wizards put amongst your real eggs. Section. Section, supposed to. Speaker section. Ramaranth asked. Her eyes narrowed before she swung her long neck back to sniff at her eggs. Section, yes. Section, Harry replied. Section, but I didn't think that that was a smart thing to do. Section. Section, very wise. Speaker section. Ramaranth stated. Section, speaker though you are, I will not allow you near my eggs. Section. Section, I didn't expect otherwise. Section, Harry admitted. Section, instead, I thought that I would paint your picture so that I would never forget the day that I first encountered a dragon. Section. Section, what is this picture that you speak of? Ramaranth asked. Harry considered the best way to answer. Section, a picture, is a way humans have of capturing an image of something that they can see onto a piece of paper or piece or canvas, and then they can look at that one thing no matter how much time passes. It'll always be the same. I can show you some others that I've done if you like. Section. Section, that may help my understanding. Section, Ramaranth stated. After placing his palette on a nearby rock, Harry rummaged in his bag and pulled out his sketch pad. Opening it to the first page, a charcoal drawing of the playground in Surrey, Harry turned it to show Ramaranth before pausing. Section, should I come closer so that it's easier for you to see? He asked. Section, there is no need, speaker. My eyesight is superior to all others. Section, he was told. Harry made sure to show a number of drawings to Ramaranth. A bowl of fruit, a tree, a bird perched on top of a chimney, and even the beginnings of the drawing of Daphne that he'd begun a couple of days ago. Section, you wish to capture my image in such a way? Section, Ramaranth asked. Section, yes, but I'll be using paints, colors, to do it. It'll last a lot longer, and then I'll always have an image of you with me no matter where the two of us go in the future. Section, Harry replied. Section, this seems a well-thought idea. I will allow it. Section, Ramaranth decided. With a smile, Harry got to work. Oil painting wasn't something that he had a lot of experience in, but he knew enough to be fairly confident that he'd do a good enough job. Concentrating on Ramaranth herself, Harry painted away, adding more paint to his palette, mixing in the potion, mixing in different colors to blend to the right shade. His strokes were strong and sure. He knew that that was the only way to paint. Tentativeness only seemed to make a painting more amateurish. As he painted, boy and dragon talked. Ramaranth told of her life back in the Dragon Reserve and the unpleasantness of having her and her eggs taken from their nest and brought to this foreign place. Harry shared about his former life and how he'd ended up in a strange contest in an even more bizarre world that he was only just beginning to understand. And in front of him, his painting began to take shape. Around them, Harry could hear the crowds growing restless the longer that he stood there. Insults were thrown at him, but he schooled himself not to react. It wasn't as though he hadn't expected it, after all. Section speaker, a wand wielder approaches section, Ramaranth stated, her eyes indicating which direction this interloper could be found. Frowning in annoyance at this interruption to his concentration, Harry turned to see Ludo Bagman creeping into the stadium, his back firmly against the wall. Harry, Mr. Bagman called tentatively. Yes, Mr. Bagman, Harry asked, trying to keep the amusement out of his voice at the fear that the pudgy man was showing. We can't declare the first task finished until you leave the stadium, Mr. Bagman admitted reluctantly. Harry eyed the canvas before him. It was coming along, the bare bones were definitely appearing, but it was still a long, long way from being finished. And while Harry'd known that there was no way that he'd be able to finish it in the time that he knew that he'd be allowed, he'd hoped to get a bit more done. I could be a while, Harry hedged. Well, we really need you to either come out of there or to at least try to get the egg, Mr. Bagman told him. Harry lifted an eyebrow at the man. Try to get the egg. That was different. For the last 3 weeks, he'd been told that he didn't have to do that just by stepping into the stadium that he'd have fulfilled the contract. Section, what does the stick wielder want? Speaker section. Ramaranth asked, interrupting his thoughts. Section, he wants me to leave, or to at least try to get the false egg hidden amongst your own section, Harry told her. Section, neither thing I want to do. I'm enjoying talking to you, and I still have a lot of work to do to get this painting to the point that I'd like to section. Section, if you wish to stay, Speaker, then stay section, Ramaranth stated, a rumble starting in her throat that Harry instinctively knew was a warning aimed at Mr. Bagman. Section, it is rare to speak to a speaker, and I do not want to give up this opportunity either. And I am curious to see this painting of me that you are doing when it is finished, section. Section, I won't get it finished today, section, Harry replied. It'll take too long, section. Ramaranth's head tilted to the side slightly as she considered this. Suddenly, her long neck twisted around until once again her nose was amongst her eggs. When next she turned around, a glint of gold in her teeth indicated the egg that she'd picked up. Lowering her head, she spat out the false egg, allowing it to spin, bounce, and roll across the ground to land at Mr. Bagman's feet. Section, there, Speaker. The wand wielder has the false egg. He can go, and you can stay as long as it takes to finish this painting of yours, section. Harry stared in surprise between the dragon and the prize that he was supposed to claim. Section, thanks, Ramaranth section. Mr. Bagman, the dragon would like me to stay here for now, so if you could take the egg back for me, I'd really appreciate it, Harry called. A bewildered-looking Ludo Bagman bent down and retrieved the egg. Oh, okay, Harry, he stuttered. With a nod, Harry turned back to his painting and to his even more fascinating conversation with a dragon, who knew that being entered into a bizarre tournament in a hidden society could bring with it such once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Chapter 12. More Slytherin than any of us. Disclaimer, I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Thursday, 24 November 1994. Severus Snape's private quarters, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Draco settled himself into the armchair that he usually used whenever he visited his godfather's quarters. At the moment, he was struggling to contain his feelings after the events of the day, not that he was sure that he could articulate exactly what those feelings were. The black robe of his godfather swished as he turned from the cupboard where Draco knew the man kept his drinks. His left hand held a mug of dark brown mead, the other a bottle. Mimicking one of his godfather's favorite expressions, Draco simply raised an eyebrow at the offered bottle of butterbeer. With a scowl, the offer was withdrawn in favor of the mead. Draco smirked victoriously as his godfather turned back once again to pour a second mug for himself. You are aware that you are not yet of age, aren't you, and that it's illegal for you to drink that? Severus asked as he took the second armchair. Draco allowed himself a long, pointed sip before replying, as if the rules applied to the likes of us. An answer worthy of your father, Severus remarked. The two sat there in silence then, both obviously replaying the day's events in their minds. This was not an uncommon occurrence for the two. More often than not, they would spend at least one night a week together, discussing the happenings within the castle and within the wider magical world in general. It had been this way since the beginning of Draco's first year. something that Draco's father had thought would be a good way for the Malfoy heir to continue his tutelage away from the unwanted attention of the Muggle-loving teachers in the school. I expected Victor to score higher, Draco commented. His performance was by far the best, Severus agreed. He was the only one of the three proper champions to remain uninjured. It was simply unfortunate that the beast destroyed its own eggs. Even Igor admitted that he had to take a point off for that. The champions were told, after all, that the real eggs were not to be harmed. Still, Draco replied, leaving the rest of his thought unspoken, though his meaning was clear to both. Potter made a mockery of the whole tournament, though, Draco remarked. Did he? Severus asked, a contemplative look appearing on his face. Of course he did. To stand there painting a picture of the stupid dragon instead of competing as a proper champion should, Draco stated vehemently. And yet he got the egg, Snape replied, his look deepening. The dragon gave it to him, Draco replied, waving away the observation. Severus' eyes focused on his godson, and yet that was the objective of the task. The two sat in silence for a minute then, both reliving the memory of how Potter had convinced the dragon to give him the egg. A parcel-tongue Potter who would have ever imagined it, Severus mused. Parcel-tongue, Draco snorted. He's polluting Salazar's noble ability even by simply having the ability. And yet, how many of us would give anything to have it as well? Severus asked, waving a hand towards the far wall, beyond which lay the Slytherin dungeons. The last of us to have it was the Dark Lord himself. And so he should, Draco replied. If someone should, then the descendant of Slytherin himself should have it, not someone like Potter. It was at this point that Draco finally noticed the contemplative and slightly calculating look that his godfather wore. What are you thinking? He asked. It is a well-known fact that at next year's sorting, Potter will join the school properly, Severus stated. What I am wondering is where he will be sorted. He'll be another stupid Gryffindor, Draco replied with certainty. Are you sure? Severus asked, one eyebrow raised. What makes you think so? He's a Potter. Where else would he go? You don't think that one of the other houses would suit him better? Hufflepuff, or Ravenclaw, or even Slytherin? Severus asked. Draco's face morphed into a horrified visage. Slytherin? You don't seriously think that he'd end up with us? He's not even a pure blood. I'm beginning to wonder, Severus replied. And purity of blood is not as much of a factor as we'd prefer it to be. Look at Davis, she's a half-blood as well, not to mention the handful of others. And after the show that Potter put on the first day that he was here, do you really believe that he doesn't have the power to make it in the House of Snakes? Draco's face grimaced at the effective way that Potter had proven his point. Not to mention that it had taken him a couple of weeks of intimidation to re-establish the proper pecking order from those who thought that they were more powerful than he was. Power's one thing, Draco eventually replied, but it takes more than that to make it down here. What are the traits that make us Slytherins who we are? Severus asked. Resourcefulness, cunning, ambition, self-preservation, Draco replied automatically. From what I've seen, Potter may just possess those very traits, and when you add in his parcel-tongue ability, he may just be even more Slytherin than the rest of us, Severus stated. Draco's horrified expression intensified. How do you come to that conclusion? Severus eyed his godson contemplatively as he swirled the remaining mead in his mug before answering. From what I understand, Potter did not have to compete. Yes, his name came out of the goblet, but he had the choice, and what he chose was to enter a competition in such a way to preserve his magic. He has also begun gathering allies. The Minister of Magic and Barty crouch among them, and then using them to his advantage. Consider how he used them to get out of potions lessons with me after working out that I had no intention of teaching him anything. We know that he is powerful, even as untrained as he is. He could have used that power in the tournament today, Instead, he succeeded in completing the task without casting a single piece of magic. He had the blasted beast do all the work for him. He also has the best students in his age group tutoring him, students from every house at that. He's making inroads to all the houses, gathering allies and those useful to him. The rest of the staff are fawning over how quickly he is picking up his lessons, and already they are contemplating what additional material they could introduce to him. Just imagine what he'll be like in a few years, knowledgeable in magic, power at his fingertips, the fame that comes from being the boy who lived and the one who vanquished the Dark Lord, allies and those useful to him in his pocket. What won't he be able to do? Draco stared at his godfather and mentor as he contemplated the person that had just been described. "You really think that Potter will be that powerful?" Draco finally asked. "He already has the Potter money at his back. Once he delves into politics, the world will be his for the taking," Severus replied. "Just as the Dark Lord envisioned for himself," Draco murmured, remembering all that he'd learnt at his father's knee. Finally, Draco looked up into his godfather's eyes. "If Potter really is as Slytherin as you say, what should we do?" Severus gave the dregs of his mead one last swirl before swallowing what was left. Even that didn't alleviate the bitter taste that was in his mouth. Perhaps we need to rethink our strategy for dealing with Harry Potter," he admitted. /0v0 / Thursday, 24 November 1994. Harry's quarters, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. "You know, for someone who was told to keep their Parseltongue ability a secret, you did a lousy job of following instructions," Daphne stated dryly. Harry gave her a nonplussed look over his shoulder as he led her, Hermione, Susan, and Neville into his rooms. A sigh of relief washed over him as he passed over the threshold. It was nice to escape. He'd spent most of the day with Ramaranth, chatting away with the Hungarian horntail and painting her picture. Of course, he followed along when the dragon handlers had insisted that she be moved back to the pen that they'd built to hold all of the dragons. That, of course, led to Harry being introduced to and conversing with the other 3 dragons. Not that Ramaranth was in a mood to share. She seemed rather proprietary of her speaker, as she'd called him. By the time that he'd returned to the castle, it was already the dinner hour. It was an incredibly hungry Harry who'd plonked down on the closest bench, Hufflepuff, and started to fill his plate. It only registered, as he was spooning up the roast potatoes, that those around him had either scurried away or squished closer to the neighbors and further away from him. Looking up and around, he saw a myriad of people looking at him, staff and students from all 3 schools, and the one thing that they had in common was the look of fear in their eyes. It was only then that he'd remembered the conversation that he'd had with his friends the day that he'd arrived. Talking to snakes, Parseltongue, was the equivalent to announcing that you were a dark wizard, or, at least in his case, a dark wizard in training. "It would have been rude to ignore her," Harry retorted. "Besides, she surprised me." "She surprised you," Susan spluttered. "What about us?" The stadium was charmed, you realize, so that everyone in the stands could hear exactly what was going on in the middle. "And all we could hear was an awful lot of hissing and spluttering," Hermione continued. "As interesting an ability it sure sounds scary." "At least he got the egg," Neville shrugged. "Yes, tell us, Harry, how did you manage to convince a full-grown dragon to do your bidding?" Daphne asked. "Well, I didn't really," Harry admitted, scratching the back of his neck. "When Mr. Bagman arrived and I told Ramaranth what he wanted, well, she just decided to give it to him." "Just like that," Daphne persisted. "Well, she did want me to finish the painting so that she could see it," he admitted. "The dragon gave you the egg so that she could have her portrait painted," Daphne repeated, shaking her head before dropping it into her hands. Harry stared at the long, silky black tresses. "Well, yeah." When her shoulders started shaking, he looked in panic at Neville, who threw his hands up in a gesture of "don't ask me." Next, he swung his eyes to the other two girls, but before they could advise him, Daphne's head lifted to reveal her laughter. Tears were rolling down her cheeks, long before she managed to get it back under control. Who knew dragons could be so vain? She wheezed. Well, let's see it then, Susan said, indicating the pack beside his chair. It's not finished, he cautioned. Nevertheless, he lifted the flap and pulled the canvas from the expanded inside pocket. Lifting it up, he spun it around. For the most part, Ramaranth, the Hungarian horntail dragon, was displayed in all her glory. Sure, there were still parts that Harry wanted to touch up, and one or two spots that he hadn't quite finished to his satisfaction, but overall, it was a perfect likeness. Below her feet, a rough sketch had been done of her eggs, the golden one prominently displayed. Obviously, I haven't even started on the background, Harry stated. I kind of thought that getting Ramaranth done first was the most important. Well, that makes sense. You wouldn't want a dragon mad at you at all, Hermione commented dryly. It's amazing, Harry, Neville exclaimed. How long will it take you to finish? Harry considered what he'd already done and what there was still to do. Hours, probably a lot more hours than I'd like to think, he replied. And then there'll be the finishing potion and the spell to add to it in order to animate it. You're making a magical painting? Susan asked, her eyes round. Thought that I'd give it a try, Harry admitted. Of course, I didn't know that Ramaranth could talk when I decided that, so I'm not sure exactly how much of her personality I'll be able to catch with the potion and spell. Just the fact that you're trying is amazing, Susan told him. I don't think that there are many magical portrait artists in Britain at all. There aren't, Daphne added. My grandparents wanted to have a portrait done of them a couple of years ago, and they ended up having to commission someone from Italy, I think it was. They didn't think anyone in Britain was good enough. Now it was Harry's turn to have his eyes go wide in astonishment. Mrs. Jenkins, his old art teacher, had always insisted he was good, that he had a real talent. Maybe he'd found something that he could do in the magical world. It was definitely something for him to think about anyway. But getting back to the problem at hand, you do realize that now everyone's going to think that you're a dark wizard, don't you? Daphne asked seriously. I know, Harry sighed. Is there anything that I can do to dispel that train of thought? Time, Harry, Susan replied, reaching across and patting his knee. I don't think that there's anything you can do but give them time. Just be yourself, Hermione added. They'll soon realize that you're a good person. Being the boy who lived'll have to help, I'd think, Neville put in. Harry gave him a nonplussed look. I'd rather just be Harry, just Harry. Now Tharty's something that I don't think that you could ever be, Daphne stated. And from what I've seen in the past 3 weeks, that's not a bad thing at all. /0v0 / Friday, 25 November 1994. Office of the Minister for Magic, London. Good morning, Minister. A high, girly, simpering voice said from the doorway to the Minister of Magic's office. Looking up from his paperwork, Cornelius gave an internal groan while plastering a wide smile on his face. Dolores Umbridge, his senior undersecretary, had more than a few uses. She was the consummate yes-man, and willing to do anything that he ordered, suggested, or even implied in the vaguest sense, thus keeping his hands clean from the muck that she either did or kept away from him. That didn't actually mean that he liked the woman. It simply meant that she was too damn useful to do anything but keep her close. Dolores, what a pleasant surprise. I didn't expect you to be working this early this morning, he replied. If the Minister of Magic is going to be here working, where else should I be? She simpered. At his invitation, she approached his desk and hopped up onto one of the chairs across from it. So, what can I do for you this morning? Cornelius asked, already knowing the answer from what she held in her hands. It's the Potter boy, Minister. I assume that you've seen today's Daily Prophet, she replied, slapping a copy of said paper onto his desk. Cornelius made a show of perusing the front page and Rita Skeeter's article. Yes, yes, I saw it earlier. What about it? The conclusions that Miss Skeeter draws cannot be denied, Minister, Umbridge simpered. And I have to ask, is it wise for the boy to continue to be educated? Cornelius sighed and decided to hedge. Wise or not, there is little that we can do about it. Harry Potter has been declared an adult, and in terms of his education, it is Hogwarts that is in charge of educating our young, including Mr. Potter. But one with such dark inclinations, Umbridge protested. Surely the ministry should get involved and ensure that the boy cannot gain any more knowledge or power. We would, of course, simply be protecting our future. Perhaps, Cornelius replied, sitting back in his chair and steepling his fingers as he thought. Umbridge, though, simply couldn't resist pushing her point. The boy controlled a dragon minister, and through the darkest of means possible, Parseltongue. And we all know that Parseltongue can only be wielded by the darkest of wizards. We could very well be looking at the next Dark Lord. And the powers that he already controls, she continued. If it is indeed true that the boy can do wandless magic without any training whatsoever, what will he be capable of in the future? No, Minister, I feel that this is something that the ministry needs to nip in the bud now. The public will surely thank us later. The Ministry of Magic has no jurisdiction within Hogwarts, Cornelius reminded the worked-up witch. We simply have no legal way to force Dumbledore to withhold education from the boy. A raised hand prevented Umbridge from protesting. What I will do is have Barty and Ludo go see the boy. They've built up something of a rapport with him. They can feel him out, see how dark he truly is, and from there, we can decide what the most appropriate response should be, he stated. Umbridge stared at him, her face darkening in such a way that Cornelius knew that she wasn't happy with this decision. If you'd like, Minister, I could begin preparing some legislation in the form of educational decrees, just in case they are needed, she suggested. Wanting to get the woman out of his office, Cornelius took the easy way out. An excellent plan, Dolores. Take your time and get them right. We wouldn't want Dumbledore to slip through some sort of loophole if we have to use them. Umbridge hopped off of her chair, making little difference in her height. I'll get right on it, Minister. Good day. Yes, good day, Dolores, he replied. With a slight scowl, he threw the offending newspaper into the bin and got back to work. /0v0 / Friday, 25 November 1994. The Great Hall, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. After the way that everyone in the castle was avoiding him or staring fearfully at him or whispering behind palms while watching what he was doing at dinner the night before, Harry made sure to wait as long as possible before going down to breakfast that morning. When he tentatively poked his head in the doorway, he was relieved to find that it was mostly empty. The only students inside wore black robes, meaning that there were no Durmstrang or Beauxbaton students there. And of those who wore black, there were only a smattering at each table, the ones who didn't have an early class that day. After a quick scan, he determined that the Ravenclaw table was the most empty, so that was his destination that morning. To enhance his distance from the Hogwarts students, he made sure to pick the most deserted spot at the table as well. His eyes darted about from under his bowed head as he scooped porridge into his bowl, ensuring that he'd have some notification before anyone approached him. A lone copy of Daily Prophet caught his attention, and he reached along the table to snag it and pull it towards him. The first thing that caught his eye was a picture of him. It captured the moment where, beyond him, Ramaranth had twisted around, picked up the golden egg, and deposited it at the feet of Ludo Bagman. And then the headline caught his attention, and he froze. He already controls dragons. Just how dark will Potter become? By Rita Skeeter. In morbid curiosity, he couldn't help but read the accompanying article. At yesterday's first task of the TriWizard tournament, all those in attendance, including this reporter, had a chance to see just what our future holds when the fourth champion entered the arena. This, dear readers, was the boy who killed you-know-who and was then lost to us in the Muggle world. At the age of 11, when everyone expected him to return to the wizarding world as a student at Hogwarts, he failed to appear. It was only after his name came out of the Goblet of Fire 3 weeks ago that Harry Potter returned to us. This reporter has always wondered exactly what young Harry was learning all those years in secret. And now we know. Whether true champions of the tournament tackled their task with true bravery and marvelous displays or transfiguration, charms or hexes to achieve their goals, what did the fourth champion do? Why, dear readers, he simply walked into the arena, set up a diversionary tactic in the form of painting, and began talking to the dragon. That's right, talking. At least that is what most would have us believe. In fact, no one knows for certain what young Harry said, for they weren't conversing in English. Oh no, dear readers, Harry Potter is a Parselmouth. By the time that he'd finished ordering the dragon to comply, it had given the golden egg to Potter without a piece of magic being performed. And if he can already order dragons around, what isn't he capable of? Never fear, dear readers. This reporter made it her business to find out all that she could about Harry Potter. He can do wandless magic, one of his peers, who wanted to remain nameless, told me. He can summon things really easily, and that's without ever being taught anything. And you should have seen the show that he put on the first day that he was there. Another related, clearly scared by what they were remembering. He had a bunch of students line up, all of different status, purebloods, half-bloods, and Muggleborns, and had them do a simple lumos to show that Muggleborns are even more powerful than the purebloods. But when it was his turn, he created this ball of light on his hand that nearly blinded me. It was that powerful. There you are, dear reader. Even before coming to Hogwarts, Harry Potter had been developing his powers, powers that are so strong that they scare his peers. And now he's being taught even more magic. And when you add in the fact that there hasn't been a light-sided witch or wizard who could speak Parseltongue in recorded history, one has to wonder, why is Harry Potter being trained at all? Wouldn't it be far safer to stop this burgeoning dark wizard before his knowledge grows beyond what we can handle? Rest assured, dear readers, despite the danger, I will continue to investigate exactly how dark Harry Potter has already become. Harry dropped his spoon, letting it clatter onto the table. Suddenly, he just wasn't hungry. /0v0 / Saturday, 25, November 1994. Astronomy Tower, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Up here was safe. From what he understood, the tower was only used at night, either for astronomy lessons or for secluded rendezvous. The middle of the day on a Friday meant that he was guaranteed to have the tower to himself. He'd needed somewhere to calm himself down after reading that article. Just the very thought of it still boiled his blood. As if merely having the ability to talk to dragons or snakes or reptiles in general made someone dark, he thought savagely. And worse still was the way that they'd made him out to be the next Dark Lord, as if he'd ever want to be anything like the man who'd killed his parents, sentencing him to a lifetime of Dursleys. The instant that he'd finished reading the thing, he dropped it and fled. His rooms were safe, but he'd felt closed in, trapped, and he hadn't been able to stand it. Briefly, he'd considered working on his painting of Ramaranth, but he didn't want to take the risk of ruining it in his agitation. The thought of working on his display cabinet, too, didn't fill him with the sense that it would calm him. In the end, he'd grabbed up a block of European redwood, a wood perfect for what he had in mind, plus his knife set, and set off to find somewhere out of the way. A group of second or third years milling around the entrance hall discouraged the idea of wandering out into the grounds. Instead, he'd gone up, eventually ending where he currently sat. From here, his back pressed up against the smooth stone wall, he could look out over the swaying treetops of the forest, the mountains in the distance, and simply breathe. His hands occupied themselves with the block of soft red and yellow wood, his knife steadily shaving off small pieces. Looking down, he could see the beginnings of one wing starting to emerge, a very familiar wing after staring at its real-life counterpart yesterday. It seemed that before long, there'd be a new animal to join his collection of carvings that he'd done. Gradually, the longer that he'd stayed hidden up here, the more his mind settled. He'd finally calmed enough to begin thinking about the article rationally. This Skeeter person was obviously some type of gossip writer, the exact type that his aunt loved so much. She'd be one to write just enough truth to satisfy her editors, while ensuring that there was more than enough innuendo and slander to satisfy her readers. She could be a problem, but in essence, she was a nobody. If it wasn't for the labels that he'd acquired, The Boy Who Lived and TriWizard Champion, he wouldn't even rate a mention from her. Unfortunately, that's exactly what he'd become known as. In the Muggle world, he was just Harry, a nobody who happened to have a couple of useful skills. Here, in the magical world, he'd forever be gawked at. The question that he really had to ask himself was whether it was worth it. Was learning magic worth all the unwanted attention and slander that was going to be piled on him? Competing in this tournament meant that he kept his magic. Not to mention that here in the magical world, they'd made him an adult. Back in the real, normal world, he was still just a kid. But once the tournament was over, he'd be close enough to 15 that it wouldn't matter. Plenty of kids lived by themselves at that age in the non-magical world. And he had the money in those vaults to be able to support himself, no matter what he did. With a sigh, Harry zeroed in on the question that he needed to answer. After this tournament was over, was it worth staying here in this world, or would it be better to go back to where it was saner, more normal? At least he had 7 months to come to a decision. /0v0 / Armake of Chapter 11, courtesy Offson Manwake. Section Ramaranth, what's taking you so long out there? Have you figured out why these two-leggers brought us all here for? Hurry and get back here. You take over comforting Ragnar. Some crazy two-legger did something to her eyes and caused her eggs to get crushed. You know I'm no good with this emotional stuff. Section. Yes, apparently they brought us all out here for some sort of contest. The two-legger I was assigned to can speak our language and explained it all to me. Section contest. Poor Ragnar lost her children for a contest. For two-legger sport. Did you eat your two-legger? Section no, I didn't. He's not really interested in the contest itself and is making a picture of me instead. Section a picture. What the heck is a picture? Section 1. Explanation later. Section Ramaranth, tell your two-legger to let us see. In fact, have him make a picture of us also to take home with us. My cave could use some sprucing up. Is he any good with crying women? Introduce him to Ragnar. Section